Chapter 469. Xian walked warily towards the door, and then his eyes unconsciously narrowed into a line. The oncoming air seemed to be constantly spraying out fine dust, but in fact, the air was as clean as if it had been washed, and there was nothing in it. This meant that the primal energies of the universe in this palace, in the deepest part of the Tianliang ancestral lands, were too unique. The invisible energy flows gave people a tangible feeling. There was clearly nothing in front of him, only pure air. However, light was strangely folded inside, making it impossible for people to see through with their eyes and senses. It was as if there was nothing inside, but also as if there was a vast new world inside. But just as he hesitated, his body shook as Ding Ning walked forward, stepped through the stone door before him, and stepped onto the first stone step. Xian raised his head slightly, looked at Ding Ning's back, and silently followed in. Just as he passed the stone door, a step away, his eyes lit up with blinding light. This light was deep green, as though someone had placed countless deep green gemstones in front of him. But the gemstones were not alive and would not sway softly. Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing followed Xian onto the first stone step, and then their breathing stopped. What appeared in front of them were countless swaying green grasses. The stone steps in front of them did not go down directly, but slowly went down along the surrounding stone walls. The inside of this palace was an enormous spiral-shaped hole that went straight down into the mountain. These stone steps had been carved out of the spiral-shaped tunnels in the stone walls. Deep green grasses grew on the stone walls and under the deep hole. These grasses were taller than people, but exceptionally soft. They were almost translucent like gems. They did not look like grass that grew in dry land, but water grasses that grew in clean seawater. Due to the wondrous refraction of light, above and around them, and even at the bottom of the hole, there seemed to be soft green grasses growing everywhere. They seemed to have come to an underwater world without water. So even as they walked on these steps, they did not know if this palace had a top. Because it was too mysterious, it was easy for people to feel fear. In particular, the people whose foreheads had been pierced by the wormhole were all experts who had tried to enter this place. Then in the legends, where were the corpses of the Tianliang experts who had finally killed all the infected Tianliang people, survived, and then collectively committed suicide? Were they here? Yet to their puzzlement, Ding Ning seemed to be very confident and calmly walked at the front. He walked down the spiraling stone steps, his steps growing faster, even faster than he usually walked on the streets of Chongling. After going down dozens of spirals, he suddenly stopped and looked up at the top of the palace. Xian immediately looked up, his gaze flashing. He seemed to understand why Ding Ning was looking up now. Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing did not understand. When Hu Jingjing faced Li Shixing, she often felt inexplicably embarrassed, but she did not feel this in front of Ding Ning. She knew that even the publicly acknowledged cultivation genius of the Qin dynasty, Jing Liuli, was learning from this wine shop youth. She naturally was not as good as Jing Liuli, so it was not a problem to appear stupid in front of this wine shop youth. So she asked softly, "What happened?" "The spirit rain you," and Li Shixing made as stopped, Ding Ning answered. Hu Jingjing was taken aback. Only now did she realize that although the seaweed-like long grass was still swaying, the glimmering light at the top had already disappeared. It was only at this moment that she realized that the ripples she felt when she looked at the ceiling were the spiritual rain falling on the ceiling. Ding Ning had answered her question, but he still did not look down and continued to look at the top. A new question naturally arose in Hu Jingjing's heart. However, in the next moment, like a scorching sun sinking into the water, a dazzling golden color suddenly appeared in the transparent water-like color above. Then, this dazzling golden light quickly expanded. Then, with an ear-piercing screech that made her eardrums hurt, accompanied by wild winds, an enormous golden figure rapidly flew down like a meteor, brushing past them and stabbing downwards. This was the golden vulture that had been casually slaughtering the other birds in the sky. At this moment, its neck had been injured by some strange beast. There was a foot-long wound on its neck, and golden blood was flowing out of it. This powerful beast with powerful energy vibrations in its blood was just the beginning. Hiss, hiss, the top of the palace was like a leaking balloon and gave off many strong sounds of air currents. An indigo serpent, a white-winged serpent, and a black shadow so fast it could not be seen clearly flew down after the golden vulture. When the over 50 feet long cyan flood dragon flew past them, it paused for a moment. It was obvious that there was a biting cold, killing intent permeating the air, but it only paused for a moment. This cyan flood dragon seemed to be afraid of falling behind and didn't pay any attention to them. Should we hurry up? Li Shixing took a deep breath, looked at the wildly swaying long green grass, and asked Ding Ning. No need. Ding Ning shook his head. Then he looked again at the wildly swaying long grass around him and said, Do not touch these grasses. They are poisonous. Why didn't you warn us earlier? Shen Xian looked at the side of his face and said in a cold voice. Ding Ning continued to walk down the stone steps. At the same time, he said, Because they were not poisonous at the start. You should have heard of the mimosa. These long grasses are similar. Under certain conditions, they change internally. Shen Xian did not look surprised at all. His previous words seemed to be purely probing. Why do you have such strong senses? Ding Ning did not hesitate and said crisply, Because of the heaven-replenishing divine art. Shen Xian was silent for a moment and said, If I bring the heaven-replenishing divine art to Zheng Xiu and tell her about you, can you still use the explanation of the heaven-replenishing divine art? Ding Ning did not turn to look at him and smiled. That is a matter for the future, and you should have made your choice. After a pause, Ding Ning turned to look at Shen Xian, who had sunk back into silence. He said seriously and sincerely, In my view, the more mysterious and powerful I am like this ancestral land, the more incredible it seems, the more confident you will be in making such a choice. Because our relationship will always be one of cooperation, and not one of master and servant. If everything goes smoothly, I will definitely give you what you want. Shen Xian listened to Ding Ning's words until a cold and self-deprecating smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. Then he said, Do you know what I really want? Then how about I say it, and you listen? Ding Ning laughed. Shen Xian unconsciously paused in his steps. I wanted to hear what Ding Ning would say. But at this time, the water grasses in the air around them shattered like the calm water surface being shattered. With a shrill cry that made one's scalp tingle, the first golden vulture that flew in rushed out and fled with all its might. There were 5 or 6 holes in its body, and more than half of its golden feathers had fallen off. It looked worse than the chickens being slaughtered in Chongling. After the golden vulture was the fastest black shadow and the white-winged serpent. It was impossible to see what the fastest black shadow was, but when it flew by, the air was filled with black lines of blood. The back half of the white-winged serpent had disappeared. Some of its broken organs were flowing out with blood. Even if it could fly out, it feared it could not survive after losing the spirit rain with such serious wounds. The chaotic air once again shook violently. The roar of the indigo serpent seemed to sound from the depths, but it quickly disappeared, and the serpent did not come up. Chapter 470. Ding Ning listened to the roars of the indigo serpent and glanced at the black lines of blood in the air. He made a soft sound of acknowledgement. So it is dragon bats. Then he continued to walk. Young girls were always the most curious animals in the world. Nangong Kaishu was the same, Hu Jingjing was the same, and even Jing Lioli was the same. Seeing Ding Ning act as though nothing had happened, Hu Jingjing could not help but ask, What are dragon bats? An exceptionally powerful bloodthirsty bat. Because they are so strong, they were thought to have the true bloodline of the dragon race a long time ago. Knowing that she would not understand if he explained like this, Ding Ning added, Everything that was called a dragon a long time ago had great physical strength and powerful healing abilities. While these dragon bats are only 2 feet long, even if they cannot use primal energies of the universe, their physical strength is terrifying. At least they will not be weaker than the wind serpent just now. If they fought normally just now, the other beasts would not be a match for them. Right now, The Yin dynasty has a divine weapon called the Black Fiend that is made from celestial metal and the blood of these beasts. This is the imperial weapon of the Yin Emperor. Li Shixing took a deep breath. He could not help but feel cold. This is the life bond weapon of the Yin Emperor right now. Hu Jingjing found this increasingly unreal. She could not help but look at Ding Ning. Are you really not afraid at all? Ding Ning glanced at her and asked in return, Are you afraid right now? Hu Jingjing stilled. She found that she did not seem to be afraid right now. Ding Ning could not help but smile. But Hu Jingjing still felt something was wrong. She thought and looked at Ding Ning. I am not afraid right now. But because you are very calm, your emotions are affecting me. No matter how strong these beasts are, they are at most realm 7 cultivators. Since the Mountain of Ancestors has been sealed for so many years, then no matter what is inside, it will be stronger than these beasts. Since we know that this is the result of these exotic beasts going down, what's there to be afraid of? Hearing Ding Ning's explanation, Hu Jingjing fell silent for a moment before saying, Those exotic beasts are definitely stronger than all of us combined. If they can't handle it, can we? All sword manuals emphasize sword essence the most. If you can't even understand the true meaning of that sword move, then the world will naturally not be able to understand the meaning of your sword move. Naturally, you will not be able to use the most vivid Yuan Qi. Ding Ning patiently said a seemingly unrelated sentence, and then said, So some sword moves have flaws from the start. For example, the situation set up by Tian Liang, who used Li Shixing to force me to come here, seems to be perfect, but from the start, there are flaws. His trap let me know that he was from Tian Liang, and that he had forced me to come here to help him clear out some obstacles. To him, I was just a comprehension ability that was hard to match. So, he must know what is inside. What we will face will be something that can only be solved through comprehension, and will not be killed by anything. Li Shixing listened carefully. He understood what Ding Ning meant. From the start, Ding Ning felt that there were flaws in this situation, and there was a chance to turn defeat into victory. But he still frowned and said, What about the insects on the mountain path? If not for the spirit rain, I fear that after we died there, you would not have been able to deal with it. There are many possibilities. Ding Ning said, Maybe that place is not the only way to enter the ancestral mountain. Maybe if you really died there, we could sense the danger. Maybe that person knows a way to deal with the chaos insects and can guarantee that I can pass. Li Shixing nodded. He agreed with Ding Ning's thoughts. While these powerful beasts were attracted by the spirit rain, since they could enter from the top, they did not dare to come here before. But now, they dare to charge down. This means that the inside has changed due to the disappearance of the Fountain of Youth. At least in their view, there is a chance of success. Ding Ning said. Also, the things inside are very tempting to them. Hearing Ding Ning's words, Shen Xian's eyes narrowed again. These powerful beasts that could rival Realm 7 were many times rarer than Realm 7 cultivators in the world. In terms of sensing fortune and disaster, and the vibrations of primal energies of the universe, these beasts had unique senses. What was it that could make these beasts risk their lives? Just like in Chongling, if even Realm 7 cultivators had to gamble their lives for something, how astounding would it be? Bam! The white-winged serpent, its tail completely torn off, charged out of the hall like a white rainbow. Then it landed like a meteor with an enormous boom. As the dust settled, Wu Yinzi and the great shaman appeared in front of the hall. There were many legends about the ancestral lands among the royal families of the plains. Many Tianliang people had become gods in the stories. So when Wu Yinzi saw the ancestral hall with his own eyes, he was more shocked than Li Shixing and the others. At this moment, he was standing at the only entrance to the palace, looking at the stone steps and the mysterious rays of light inside. His body was still trembling. The great shaman's expression was unspeakably complicated, containing indescribable feelings. His eyes were especially lonely and ancient, like the light of the setting sun in the desert. You are too lucky. His gaze landed on the stone steps behind the hall door. He looked like he was about to move, but at this time, he suddenly stopped and said coldly, Great shaman? Wu Lianzi stilled. He turned to look at the man, unable to understand the meaning of his words. The great shaman turned around at this time. In the smoke and dust behind him, there seemed to be nothing in the void. However, a figure that did not emit any aura, but gave off an incomparably huge and powerful aura gradually revealed itself. Wu Lianzi was shocked, the blood quickly fading from his face. He was certain that the other was not a cultivator from Wuji, or even Donghu. Also, among all the Wuji and Donghu cultivators, there did not seem to be anyone with such a powerful presence. This powerful aura made him think of the incomparably huge sword, and he instantly thought of the man's identity. Jean Moque, I do not understand what you mean. This man was naturally the sect master of Lingshu Sword Gate, Gu Huai. At this time, he looked sarcastically at the great shaman, as though he had seen through the great shaman's mind, and spoke slowly. I did not know how much I had to do to enter here, and how much I had to pay. You casually entered here. This is naturally the greatest fortune, the great shaman said indifferently. The great witch said indifferently, no longer looking at Gu Huai. He just turned around and began to walk. Great shaman? Looking at Gu Huai's silent smile, Wu Lianzi sensed something, and his body started to turn cold. You still do not understand? Gu Huai passed by him and looked at him with slight disdain. If you do not want to die immediately, then follow. Wu Lianzi pressed his lips together. His body had trembled in awe and excitement, but now he was trembling in anger. He had not thought that the great shaman that all of Wuji respected had a secret agreement with these Qin people that he did not know of. The spiraling stone steps gradually came to an end. The green of the grass around them faded, and then a deep red appeared, like they had entered a maple forest in late autumn. Yet this red grew, and when it reached the end, it strangely turned purple. The bottom of the hall was not as deep as everyone had thought, and was not even as vast as the top. When the strange purple became real, the first thing that entered their eyes was a very tall tree with an unruly aura. The bottom of the hall was like an ordinary valley bottom, or rather, like the bottom of an enormous well hundreds of feet wide. There were no other plants on the flat ground except for a tree that was several hundred feet tall and emitted a purple jade-like radiance. The indigo serpent was hanging among the branches of this tree, its body pierced by many branches, and was lifeless. Chapter 471. The blood of the indigo serpent flowed on the branches of this enormous tree. But inexplicably, the blood that should have been fresh had turned into a crystalline gelatinous substance that gave people an unusually dangerous feeling. Li Shixing, Ding Ning, Hu Jingjing's teeth started to chatter, and her voice trembled. Her gaze landed on the ground not far in front of her. Following her gaze, Ding Ning frowned slightly and quickly discovered why she had such a reaction. There were no plants on the flat stone ground ahead, but there were small cracks hard to see with the naked eye. It seemed like the ground was pieced together from giant stones. Yet where Hu Jingjing's gaze landed, there was a crack that had sunk in. It looked like the crack was new. It should have been caused by the powerful beast just now charging in. The sunken area was clearly square and looked like a coffin. It was possible to see some tattered clothing and bones inside. In other words, the ground at the bottom of the valley was not made of stone, but stone coffins pieced together. Shun Xian also frowned deeply. Could it be that the people lying in these stone coffins that had formed a flat floor were all the people of Tianliang who had committed suicide here? But what alarmed him even more was that he could not sense any terrifying presence. He could not sense any terrifying presence from the purple jade-colored tree in his sight, including these stone coffins. He could not even sense any powerful energy vibrations. This caused the indigo serpent that was comparable to a Realm 7 cultivator to seem to have dissipated all its power and then hung on the tree. What do you sense? Shen Xian turned to look at Ding Ning and asked. Ding Ning did not answer and said softly, "Let me think." In his original expectations, since the Tianliang people had used Li Shixing to force him here, they naturally wanted to use him to break through some restrictions related to comprehension. But even he did not sense any restrictions at this time. He did not even sense any presence of blood and energy. Careful. His gaze once again stopped on the purple jade-like tree. However, it was also at this moment that a warning sign rose in his heart, and he shouted sternly. Shen Xian's expression suddenly changed. Almost at the same time, he shouted. His vital energy and primal energies of the universe surged out of his lone arm at an extraordinary speed. At this moment, a terrifying force was emitted from the giant purple jade-like tree and arrived in front of them. Qi. This power was extremely sharp, like a sword essence tearing through the air. Yet the energy at the bottom of the valley shook violently, like the world was filled with wind and rain with the appearance of this power. Even more importantly, this power seemed to carry the wind and rain of the world as it stabbed towards them. There was a dull thud. Shen Xian's arm was stretched forward, still in his sword-drawing posture. He had not stopped howling, but his body flew backwards, unable to bear it. He smashed hard against the mountain wall behind him, creating a wave of dust. A mouthful of blood came out of his mouth. Hu Jingjing gripped her sword, but her body was so stiff from shock that she could not draw her sword. She could not imagine the power that came from the giant tree. Just one blow was enough to seriously injure a powerful cultivator like Shen Xian. What is that? However, in the next instant, she cried out in shock again. The giant purple jade-like tree seemed to be swept by the wind and rain of the world. It changed direction slightly, like a person twisting their body slightly to face them. And within the tree, there was a person's figure. Ding Ning stood where he was, but his frown deepened. This was a real person, in the appearance of a tall, middle-aged man. He was standing on one of the exposed roots of the giant tree. The clothes on his body were almost complete. It was a gorgeous robe made of fur of several different colors. His exposed skin was extremely soft and even translucent. One could see the blood flowing through his veins. However, there was no sign of life on his body. His eyes were pale and devoid of light. He was just like a corpse. The most terrifying thing was that many soft, fleshy feelers grew out of his body, connecting with the giant purple, jade-colored tree behind him. These tentacles seemed to be an extension of his bloodline, but they were purple. Li Shixing took a deep breath and turned to look at Ding Ning. Just as Hu Jingjing cried out in shock, the figure moved slightly and seemed to raise its head to look up. In the blink of an eye, an aura had already landed on the mountain path above their heads. A storm seemed to have stopped on the mountain path. There was endless murderousness inside. Since this person had sealed their retreat path, this meant that this person most likely had his own consciousness. Shen Xian was embedded in the mountain wall. He was not in a hurry to do anything, and only glanced at Ding Ning from behind. Ding Ning sensed Li Shixing and Shen Xian's gazes on him, but he still did not express anything. He quietly examined the strange middle-aged man and murmured to himself, "What are you?" What answered him was a sword essence. The middle-aged man raised his right hand slightly and used his index and middle fingers as a sword, making a sword stance from afar. The wind and rain rose again, and the cyan flood dragon that was hanging on the tree flew up. The flood dragon's skin and flesh fell off like a cicada shedding its skin, and its bones fell off one by one. In a fraction of a second, only a snow-white spine was left. This spine became the middle-aged man's sword. The wind and rain in the world gathered in this spine, turning into a peerless sword essence that slashed towards Ding Ning and the others like a bolt of lightning. Shen Xian's body jumped out of the mountain wall. His body seemed to suddenly become empty. A scarlet-red sword energy burned, like thousands of burning peach blossoms, and crashed into the sword light. Then, in the next moment, his body crashed heavily into the mountain wall behind him. There was a loud boom. The mountain wall behind him flew into the air, forming a circular hole with him at the center. Ding Ning! Looking at the serpent spine that seemed to be flying back into the middle-aged man's hand, he shouted and sprayed blood from his mouth and nose. Everyone could sense his anger. Even Hu Jingjing and Li Shixing were certain that if Ding Ning did not react, Shen Xian would immediately flee. Follow my sword essence. Yet Ding Ning's expression was completely calm. Even his furrowed brow relaxed. He seemed to have thought through a problem that had been bothering him. Then he made a soft sound and attacked. 3 soft sounds. The last flower remnant sword vibrated 3 times. The 3 straight sword lights did not fall towards the dragon bone, but towards the air above his head. Hu Jingjing and Li Shixing could not understand. This was the most ordinary 3 talents sword, one of the most ordinary sword moves in Chongling. Most of the students of the sword school cultivated the basic sword moves after entering the school. Shen Xian could not understand either. Yet as Ding Ning's 3 straight sword lights passed through the air, he sensed some changes in the primal energies of the universe. His eyes gave off astounding light. His lone arms swung forward again. 1 sword turned into 3. The 3 scarlet sword lights followed the tracks left by Ding Ning's 3 sword lights and broke through the air. Chapter 472. This attack was likely the weakest attack Shen Xian had ever used since he entered Realm 7. But when his 3 sword energies followed Ding Ning's 3 sword lights through the air and filled the entire valley, and even the wind and rain that filled the world in their perception seemed to be torn open. Endless wind and rain gushed out from that opening. The white serpent spine in the middle-aged man's hand was still flying through the air, but the unparalleled sword essence it carried was broken. With a clang, the serpent spine was blocked by Li Shixing's sword. Li Shixing looked at the trembling Fong sword in his hand, and the enormous serpent bone that he had pushed back. Thinking of that peerless sword essence just now, he did not dare to believe this was true. Hu Jingjing looked dazedly at Ding Ning and did not dare to believe her eyes. A strange hissing sound came from the strange middle-aged man's body. Even he seemed to find it unbelievable and felt furious that his attack had been defeated like this. The moment the strange hiss sounded from his body, the surface of the white serpent bone was covered in black raindrops. The black raindrops flowed along the surface of the bone, forming powerful seal lines. There was a hum. The wind and rain in the world suddenly disappeared. Yet the serpent bone was filled with wind and rain, as though all the wind and rain in the world had been sucked onto this bone. The serpent bone, harder than steel, exploded. The swords moving through the air turned to dust, and then were pulled into new swords by the strange and powerful primal energies of the universe, black swords. Hundreds of black swords with terrifying murderousness filled the space in front of them. This was still a peerless sword essence. Shen Xian stood up. Facing this attack, he was still certain he could not stop it. But at this time, Ding Ning calmly attacked again. The last flower remnant sword in his hand and his entire arm were in a straight line. The sword energy formed into a beam and stabbed decisively towards a point in the air. There was nothing there, not even a black sword. This was still a very common sword move named Golden Cave. This sword move was just slightly more penetrative, but had no other use. On the battlefield, ordinary swordsmen used it to penetrate heavy armor. Shen Xian still did not understand, but he had no choice. He also attacked with Golden Cave. Crack, 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 crack. 2 straight sword essences tore through the air. Many cracking sounds sounded in the seemingly empty air. Shen Xian clearly felt the impact of power. He sensed that a string holding many kites had been cut by his and Ding Ning's sword essence. This kite string was a seal line formed from the other's vital energy. It was the main channel of the primal energies of the universe that supported this attack and connected to the hundreds of black swords. The moment this seal line broke, the hundreds of black swords scattered like broken kites. Li Shixing held his sword in front of him. An invisible sword energy was like a wall. The white bone powder and the black water mist were like layers of foam, crashing against the sword energy condensed from his sword, but they could not overcome it. This scene caused Li Shixing to have an illusion that he was too strong. The wind and rain disappeared. Shen Xian found that he was still alive. Yet the wind and rain seemed to reach his mind and shock him even more. This was purely using sword to defeat sword, using move to defeat move. He had to instantly sense the other's sword essence and use the most suitable sword move to defeat it. He had only seen such an ability from one person. Yet that person had seen all the sword moves in the world and fought with countless powerful swordsmen in the world before he could use all 10,000 swords. How could Ding Ning have such a level of 10,000 swords? Just as he was shocked to the point he could not control himself, Ding Ning attacked again. The last flower remnant sword in his hand trembled and swept out. Dozens of sword energies swayed and activated the primal energies of the universe to form strong winds that moved forward like sails. It was still an ordinary sword intent, named River-Breaking Wind. When Ding Ning attacked with his sword, the middle-aged man's left hand had already reached out. His left hand, which did not seem to be alive, gave off a powerful life bond presence. The enormous purple jade tree connected to him started to shake furiously, and the air above the mountain of ancestors rumbled. True rain started to fall on the plains. It was no longer a white spirit rain, but a wind containing cold, fiendish energy. It was like countless blades falling down. The seal essence came from the extremely cold sky. The middle-aged man was no different from a true grandmaster. After Ding Ning defeated the first two moves, he forced his vital energy and the primal energies of the universe he summoned into the sky. When this sword appeared, its sword intent had already reached the great accomplishment stage, so it was impossible to break it by cutting off its roots. Even if there were Realm 7 experts here other than Xin Xian, and they saw this scene, they would not feel that Ding Ning could defeat this sword. But at the same time, Ding Ning's left hand reached out and pointed at three places. Blood Sea Flower. One man against the pass. Clear light. Three rapid shouts rang out from his mouth at the same time. Xin Xian, Li Shixing, and Hu Jingjing stopped breathing at the same time, and then attacked at almost the same time. Ding Ning shouted the names of the three sword moves. These three sword moves were what the three of them had learned and belonged to them. What puzzled them the most was that Ding Ning's left hand pointed at three places. He didn't just send out vital energy to accurately mark the locations. He even brought out some of the sword essences of the three moves. So the three of them immediately understood that he wanted them to attack separately. Xin Xian's cultivation was not something the other two could compare to. While they attacked at almost the same time, their sword essences formed first. With a thought, pure life bond presence flowed out of his body. Among the deep red sea of sword light, there seemed to be a flower formed from blood. The second formed sword essence was not Li Shixing's, but came from in front of Hu Jingjing. A clear and pure ray of light burst out, carrying an aura that could dilute all filth. Li Shixing's attack had been faster than Hu Jingjing's, but his attack seemed to be difficult and heavy. His sword tip seemed to move in the air like it was carving. There was a loud boom. An invisible wall also fell from the sky. The power of these three swords could not stop the middle-aged man's endless wind and rain. They were not on the same level. Yet when the sword essences of these three swords finally spread out, the space at the bottom of the valley seemed to tremble and tilt. Ding Ning had only used one of the most ordinary sword moves. But the space at the bottom of the valley seemed to form a crystal, and then was moved by the last flower remnant sword in his hand and tilted to the side. The raindrops and wind falling from the sky, carrying terrifying sword and blade essences, rushed to the side of the mountain like flowing water, and did not fall into the valley they were in. Pew 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 pew. The hard mountain walls and the swaying green grass were as fragile as paper. They were cut into pieces, leaving behind countless deep ravines. The juice of the green grass, mixed with stone powder, flowed down like a waterfall. Even the middle-aged man connected to the tree seemed to be unable to understand how Ding Ning, Xin Xian, and the others had been able to block this attack. He paused in bewilderment. At this time, Ding Ning naturally took a step forward. It was as if he was naturally dodging the slurry of grass and stone powder that flowed down from the mountain walls. However, at the same time, he already called out three sword names in succession, his left hand already continuously moving 3 times. Yi Fei Hua, Heavenly Punishment, Bright Candle. Following his finger, Xin Xian, Li Shixing, and Hu Jingjing's figure seemed to be unconsciously moved by him. The 3 different sword essences did not join together, but strangely collided in the air. A dust-like mist sprayed outwards. The middle-aged man suddenly sensed danger, and his body shook slightly. There was a soft hiss, Behind him, a crystal light lit up. The fleshy tendrils connecting him to the purple jade tree were cut. Strange purple liquid sprayed out of the tendrils. Chapter 473. Wuya, Li City, Tianming. Ding Ning's expression did not change. His tone was extremely calm. As he stepped forward, he recited 3 sword moves, and his left hand flicked out 3 paths. Shen Xian, Li Shixing, and Hu Jingjing were so shocked they were numb. Their vital energy almost instinctively moved, and they each attacked. The 3 sword essences that were strong and weak and attracted different primal energies of the universe caused a wondrous change. With a boom, a ball of golden light suddenly fell like the sun and scattered. Dozens of blade-like golden lights slashed in all directions, and the middle-aged man's flesh tendrils were cut off again. The strange middle-aged man opened his mouth and gave off a real howl. But it was useless. With each tendril that was cut off from the enormous purple jade tree behind him, his power clearly weakened. The wind and rain he summoned was torn apart by Ding Ning's calm shouts. Ding Ning seemed to be walking in an ordinary wind and rain. With each step he took towards the middle-aged man, several tendrils behind the middle-aged man were cut off. Just like that, he slowly walked up to the middle-aged man. When he walked in front of this middle-aged man, there were only a few tendrils left connected to the giant purple jade tree behind the middle-aged man. The broken tendrils behind him were like severed blood vessels, floating in the chaotic energy behind him, looking extremely miserable. The purple jade liquid in the middle-aged man's body flowed out as the tendrils were severed. He almost became transparent. Ding Ning walked to 10 feet in front of the middle-aged man. He looked calmly at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man reached out with his hands as though he wanted to grab him through the air. However, with just this movement, the middle-aged man lost his balance and fell backwards with a loud bang. Shen Xian, Li Shixing, and Hu Jingjing stopped behind Ding Ning. The trio looked at the middle-aged man who fell backwards, and their lips uncontrollably trembled. No words could describe their emotions right now. This was a powerful cultivator who had severely injured Shen Xian with one strike. His sword essence was unparalleled, but Ding Ning had used his sword to defeat his opponent's sword essence. This was already beyond all of their knowledge, not to mention the fact that they could use the different sword wills of the 3 of them to start a counterattack. This was especially true for Ding Ning. Not only did he know the 3 men's sword techniques, but he was also able to bring out the 3 men's sword intent. This was something that had never happened before in the world of cultivators, something that no one had ever been able to accomplish. There were so many illogical and impossible things that the 3 of them didn't even know where to start. Ding Ning silently and seriously looked at the middle-aged man who had fallen on the roots of the giant purple tree. This middle-aged man had great strength and the ability to adapt to the enemy. However, he clearly couldn't think clearly and had a complete consciousness. This meant that this middle-aged man was not a living being and was not a cultivator who had cultivated some kind of secret method. However, only he could clearly sense that this middle-aged man still had some kind of fresh energy, some kind of unique life force. What exactly are you? Why is it like this? He couldn't help but repeat these words inside. Then his gaze passed the middle-aged man's body and landed on the giant purple tree behind him. Previously, the middle-aged man's body and terrifying presence had blocked their sight and perception. Now that the middle-aged man had fallen, he could see that the place where the purple tree and the middle-aged man were connected by the flesh tendrils was actually a crack. It was as if someone had slashed the giant tree with a sword and then planted many fleshy tentacles on the tree's wound, connecting it with the person. But Ding Ning was certain that the middle-aged man's power did not come from the giant purple tree. Countless invisible little silkworms moved in his body. Because of a strange presence, these little silkworms, under the suppression of his vital energy, trembled furiously and even felt terror. What could cause the 9-death silkworm to feel terror? Ding Ning took a deep breath and made himself truly calm. Then his gaze continued to move downwards. Under the crack in the giant tree, there was a well. This giant tree should have grown from the edge of the well, and then it grew bigger and bigger, almost wrapping the well in the tree. The well was a square well. There was no water in the well, only the stone steps below. A dangerous presence that only Ding Ning could sense kept on surging out. The world swayed. Some of the powerful beasts that had been fighting around the ancestral mountain were swept away by the terrifying sword essence in the wind and rain. They completely calmed down and then scattered in shock. At this time, the unparalleled sword essence silently disappeared. The fleeing beasts lost the attraction of the spirit rain. Their fervor was replaced by terror, and they did not dare to turn back. On one side of the mountain valley in the ancestral lands, stone powder and the juice of the strange grass were still flowing. The Wuji shaman called Zhan Mok, the man who was both a national teacher and a prophet in Wuji, seemed to not sense his shoes being soaked by the green grass juice. He should have been a very calm and patient person, but as he stood on the mountain path and sensed the dissipation of the unparalleled sword essence at the bottom of the valley, the muscles on his face twitched slightly. His gaze was complicated and contained countless indescribable emotions. He actually managed to break it. He was also thinking this, but the sect master of Lingshu Sword Gate, Gu Huai, who had become a legend in Chongling, had a completely different emotion. His face carried a trace of inexplicable emotion and relief, and a trace of a strange smile. What is down there? Great curiosity defeated his anger at being deceived and betrayed. Wu Lianzi could not help but ask Zhan Mok. That kind of nimble and suddenly changing sword essence was not something that could be created by fixed restrictions or seal weapons. But the ancestral lands had been sealed for countless years. Could there still be a living, peerless cultivator here? In the next moment, Wu Lianzi grew even more furious. Because of disdain, Zhan Mok did not answer his question and did not even look at him. Here, a Wuji prince like him was as unimportant as a passerby. How do you know my sword move? Under the purple jade tree, Xin Xian stared hard at Ding Ning's face as though he wanted to draw blood from the other's face. You did not create this sword move. Since it has been passed down, there are countless possibilities if I want to know. Also, this is not important. Ding Ning met Xin Xian's devouring gaze and shook his head. He said coolly and confidently, "The key is that I am stronger than you imagine. The stronger I am, the more meaningful our cooperation will be. You want to cut this thing to pieces?" Li Shixing finally recovered his calm. He looked at the strange middle-aged man who was still trembling. He originally wanted to say, "Cut this person to pieces." But after hesitating, he still felt that this could not be described as a person. No matter what this thing was, he still felt it was extremely dangerous. If Ding Ning was not here, if he and Hu Jingjing were here, his choice would be to cut this middle-aged man and the giant purple jade tree to pieces. No, they are here. Ding Ning shook his head and said softly as he looked at the mountain wall. Then he motioned for everyone to follow, including Xin Xian, who was looking silently at him. But he did not walk towards the well and circled around to the other side of the giant purple jade tree. The back of the well. On the mountain path where stone powder and green grass juice mixed to form a waterfall, 3 figures slowly appeared. Chapter 474. Xin Xian followed behind Ding Ning. But before he could see the faces of the 3 figures, he only sensed the presences of Gu Huai and Zhan Mok. He smiled self-deprecatingly and looked coldly at Ding Ning's back. He said softly, "How can we kill them?" Ding Ning said calmly, "There is still a chance. I can believe you, and I can continue our agreement." Xin Xian was silent for a moment. His cold eyes once again showed some heat. This heat seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "But if we are going to risk our lives, we may die. I need you to answer my previous question. Everything in this ancestral land was too mysterious and powerful. Just coming in from the mountain path outside felt like many years." Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing could not remember what Xin Xian had asked. However, Ding Ning was very clear. He turned and looked seriously at Xin Xian. In reality, the Shang family is not the only one forgotten in the Qin dynasty, but also the Li family. You should know that the Shang family and the Li family are the greatest contributors to the rise of the Qin dynasty. Xin Xian took a deep breath. He did not speak, but his vital energy started to vibrate. Ding Ning looked at him and said, I can have you do what the Li family did, and I will not let you die in vain. What is the Li family? Hu Jingjing could not help but ask. She knew of the Shang family, but had never heard of the Li family. Master Li? Li Shixing looked at Ding Ning and asked. Hu Jingjing was shocked. Li Si? You can say it is that Li family. Ding Ning looked at the shocked her and said softly, Prime Minister Li Si is Si. That master is master's master. Master Li is a servant of that Li family. That Li family is gone now. Prime Minister Li is just a servant of that Li family? Hu Jingjing could not believe her ears. The Shang family reformed, and the Li family reformed. They punished those who stole with their nose and ears cut. The country is rich and the people are strong, but their grievances are too deep, so they ended up like the Shang clan. Li Shixing looked at her, who could not understand, and said, Before the Shang family, the Li family became a sacrifice to appease anger and resentment. These matters had been slowly forgotten in the first year of Yuan Wu. After more than a decade, a young girl like Hu Jingjing could not imagine. She did not understand Ding Ning's connection to the Li family and Xin Xian. But Xin Xian laughed inexplicably. Is there something like the death exemption token of the Yu dynasty? There will be, but the law is greater than the golden medallion of freedom from death, Ding Ning said without hesitation, looking at him. Xin Xian looked at Ding Ning's calm eyes and smiled. It was a strange smile, but he did not say anything. He looked up at the three figures that had become clear. Ding Ning did not look at him anymore. He raised his head and looked at Gu Huai and the others who had already reached the bottom of the valley. His gaze was still unusually calm, but like many people who did not like him, Gu Huai inexplicably disliked him and frowned. But the first to speak was not him, but the great shaman who had a high status in Wuji but had betrayed Wuji. How fortunate! Thank you. Zhang Mo bowed seriously to Ding Ning in thanks. Ding Ning nodded in return, but did not speak to him. He turned to look at Gu Huai, who was frowning slightly, and asked seriously, Must I die here? Gu Huai stilled slightly and suddenly felt some sympathy. But then it turned to slight disdain. He looked at Ding Ning and said with slight disdain, You are too smart. Even I had not expected you to be able to lead them here, and survive just now when facing a sword essence that even I may not have been able to withstand. Compared to your performance, the heaven-replenishing divine art and some of her feelings become unimportant. Ding Ning's calm expression changed slightly. It was not terror, but slight disdain like him. Back then, you had to try to kill that person. Was it the same? Not just because of power, but because he was too outstanding and strong, so strong that you felt danger and could not surpass him? Gu Huai's expression turned cold, but he did not disguise it. He said coolly, Just like how many ancient dragons died naturally, the heavens will not allow something that can eat anyone and has no natural enemies to exist. Just because of this? Ding Ning laughed. So there is no need to care about friendship or even brotherhood. Gu Huai sneered and did not answer. For him, with Ding Ning's present status and situation, he did not need to and disdain to answer his question. Shameless. Hu Jingjing was so angry, she started to tremble all over. From the start, she understood that this powerful cultivator of Wuji, or rather, this expert related to Tianliang in the past, had been in cahoots with Zheng Xiu long ago. So they had used this war to open this ancestral land. But only now did she understand through their conversation why Ding Ning had asked Gu Huai such a question at the start. Because he was too wary, because Ding Ning was too outstanding, Gu Huai would not allow Ding Ning to leave alive. In her view, this was too shameless. Official Xin? Gu Huai did not look at her. In his view, he did not need to waste any effort on a weak cultivator like Hu Jingjing. He looked at Xin Xian next to Ding Ning and asked with a nod. Xin Xian did not move. He just stood coldly and did not make a sound. It was just that he could not say anything, which made his attitude clear. The sneer on the corner of Gu Huai's mouth deepened. Do you feel that you can keep him alive, get the heaven-replenishing divine art from him, and then return to Chongling and have glory? He looked at Xin Xian and said, Even if there is such a possibility, do you feel you can do it in your present situation? jealous of talent, borrowing power, shameless. Li Shixing's voice sounded at this time. The sect master of Spirit Void Sword Sect is just so. Even I feel ashamed. Many little drops made an ocean. Gu Huai was furious at these people's attitudes. But at this time, Ding Ning's calm voice sounded again. Since this is the case, you will be the first to die today. Everyone's gaze gathered on Ding Ning. Gu Huai laughed. He raised his head slightly like he had heard the funniest joke in the world and repeated Ding Ning's words. I will be the first to die today. 3 prisons. MOU. Clear light. Ding Ning also raised his head slightly. He did not respond and hurriedly shouted the names of the 3 sword forms. At the same time, he pointed his left hand at Gu Huai and flicked 3 times in the air. He, Xin Xian, Li Shixing, and Hu Jingjing were on the other side of the giant purple jade-like tree. Between them and Gu Huai was the giant purple jade-like tree. While they could see each other's faces when they spoke, the sword essences seemed to be pointing at the giant tree in front of them. It gave people the feeling that all the sword essences would first land on this giant tree. But in the battle, just now, Xin Xian, Li Shixing, and Hu Jingjing had thrown away all their doubts. Hearing the names of the 3 sword forms, the 3 did not hesitate. Their sword essences rose and followed Ding Ning's finger. Gu Huai's eyes were filled with even more disdain. To him, even if these 3 people's sword moves could form an inexplicably powerful and strange sword intent, their movements were still too slow for his cultivation. Before the 3 sword essences formed, his right hand slowly moved through the air. A white sword light like a full moon circled around the giant purple jade-like tree and cut horizontally towards the 3. However, at this moment, the mockery in his eyes turned into confusion and pain. He looked in disbelief at his left shoulder. A sharp energy pierced through his left shoulder, forming a hole the size of a thumb. Blood gushed out from the hole, carrying the powerful energy in his body. It was like a blood-colored river of stars. A wound like this was naturally not enough to kill him. It was not even enough to seriously injure him and affect his battle prowess. However, the impact on his mind was more intense than any battle he had experienced in the past, even more intense than the battle with the blade and sword divine Emperor Tang Xian on the wilderness. The full moon sword light was 3 feet away from Ding Ning and the others. Just as the wound appeared on his shoulder, multiple black lines appeared on the white sword light and then suddenly dissipated. Some of the sword essence contained seemed to turn into murderous intent that had pierced his left shoulder. Gu Huai's mind shook violently. In a fraction of a breath, he felt even greater disbelief. It wasn't just because his sword seemed to have been predicted beforehand and was instead used by his opponent. Most importantly, the sword intent that pierced through his left shoulder had appeared precisely at the only flaw in his sword. Without this stab, he would not have even realized that his attack would have such a flaw. In this moment, he could not block the sword essence that had attacked him. The more this is so, the more you must die. But he was the sect master of Lingshu Sword Gate. In this fraction of a breath, he figured out how to defeat Ding Ning's tactic. A strand of natal chi seeped out from his hand. As his gaze flashed violently, 15 strands of sword chi shot out, one after another, into the void above him. Ding Ning's method of guiding sword moves was not reasonable, but this unreasonable method of stabbing him had a fundamental flaw. As long as he was fast enough, Ding Ning and the others could not use this method to defeat Ding Ning's moves, even if all sword moves were nothing in Ding Ning's eyes and could be defeated. Chapter 475. Speed was unsolvable. While Gu Huai had lost to Tang Xian in the wilderness outside Guyu Pass, and his sword heart had been slightly damaged, he was the sect master of Lingshu Sword Gate and one of the strongest swordsmen in the world. He sought speed, so fast that ordinary people could not react. 15 sword intents with life origin chi had just burst out when the sky above the ancestral land was pierced. 15 points of starlight appeared, as if there were 15 real stars. This kind of sword essence was so fast that people could not think. Xin Xian only had time to feel sorrow. He knew that even if he was at his peak, he would not be able to withstand this blow. The difference was the difference. His present cultivation was enough to look down on most Realm 7s in Chongling, but he could not compare to Gu Huai and Zheng Xiao, the former legends of the Bazinkendo ground. He was always a level lower. While they were all Realm 7s, the difference was that he might not even be able to withstand one blow. These people were like gods to Chongling, and he was still immortal. So this blow was death? But when 15 stars appeared in the sky, before he could react, Ding Ning reacted. Ding Ning's reaction was simple. He reached out, vital energy surging out of his body, and slapped the purple jade tree in front of him. Many of the purple jade tree's tentacles lit up strangely, like countless bolts of lightning. They charged along these tentacles to the top of the purple jade tree, and then into the sky. Gu Huai's brows furrowed deeply. The primal energies of the universe that surged out of the purple jade tree rapidly scattered in the sky. They did not cause the power of the universe to turn into danger, and only had one use, to cut off the connection between the mistress of Chongling and his sword mountain. It was like a patch of black clouds covering the sky. Then, the starlight could not fall on his sword. He could not borrow Zheng Xiao's power, and Zheng Xiao could not borrow his sword to look here. But this still could not stop his killing intent. At this time, only one person could pose a threat to him. This person was Jean Moque, standing behind him. Jean Moque just stood quietly, but in the space between him and Gu Huai, dozens of black threads of light formed and fell towards Gu Huai's back like metal wires. The 15 stars above Gu Huai's head fell down. They did not land on Ding Ning, but on the space between him and Jean Moque. It was as if the calm surface of a frozen lake was broken. A few crisp cracking sounds were heard in this cramped space. A straight white line was formed between the two of them, like a heavenly river that cut through the two worlds. Gu Huai's body flew dozens of feet forward. Jean Moque's body flashed and appeared at the edge of the mountain wall flowing with stone powder and grass juice. A wide gully appeared between him and where he had been standing. The surface of the stone coffin was shattered. Even though he bore almost all the power, Wu Yinzi, who had been standing next to him, was still affected. His body slammed heavily into the cliff. When the boom sounded, Wu Yinzi spat out a mouthful of blood. Blood flowed out of Gu Huai's left shoulder again. He did not look at Ding Ning, Shun Xian, and the others. He turned coldly and looked at Jean Moque, who had stopped in front of the cliff. His smile was filled with disdain and even a hint of pity. You cannot resist so soon? Jean Moque did not meet his gaze and just looked up at the sky. He said calmly, "He is right. You are the strongest person here, so you must be the first to die. Also, you are wounded, and Zheng Xiao cannot see your sword now. As long as she cannot see through your sword, she cannot sense what is truly in my ancestral lands." After a pause, Jean Moque continued, "As long as I kill you, she cannot know what I have obtained from here. She will not go crazy because of this. If she wants to conquer this wasteland and deal with the Chu, Yin and Qi, she will cooperate with me." "A very good idea." Gu Huai laughed loudly, but then his smile disappeared. He said expressionlessly, But you are not Tang Xian." These words were not hard to understand at this time. Jean Moque knew that he was not as strong as Tang Xian, but he did not become angry because of these disdainful words. He slowly looked down, and his gaze landed on Ding Ning. Gu Huai looked at him expressionlessly, like he was looking at a dead person. Then he attacked. He always understood the principle of attacking first, especially the lesson from the 3 years before Yuan Wu's ascension. He deeply understood the benefits of attacking first. At this time, he needed to be fast. He would not attack after everyone else had attacked. The seriously wounded Xin Xian was no longer a threat to him, but this person from Tianliang was still a terrifying enemy. So he did not hesitate to use the fastest sword of Bomb Mountain sword field in the past, and the fastest sword in the world up until now. This sword was called Thought Void. As Gu Huai's thoughts moved, the space in front of Jean Moque seemed to split open, and a sword shadow appeared. This sword shadow was only a foot long, but it was extremely heavy. It had a presence that could suppress the world, like the miniature of the Sword Mountain sword, not just in front of Jean Moque. At the same time, The space in front of Ding Ning, Shun Xian, Li Shixing, and Hu Jingjing seemed to split open, and such a sword shadow appeared. All 5 of them were real sword shadows. Other than Wu Lianzi, who had not stood up, Gu Huai's sword had killed 5 people at the same time. Jean Mok's hand flipped upwards, and a powerful life bond energy came out. This was a blade essence, but it seemed to have the power to resonate with the moon, like he had plucked the moon from the night sky. The time between this thought was too short, but he was waiting, because he could only block Gu Huai's attack. If Ding Ning could not resolve the situation, then in the next moment, Ding Ning and the others would all die. Ding Ning did not seem to move, but a sword essence, so light it was almost undetectable, was faster than his blade essence, and even faster than Gu Huai's thought void sword essence. This light sword essence came from the middle-aged man lying on the roots of the enormous purple jade tree. When Jean Mok's blade essence rose, it turned to wind and rain. Gu Huai, expressionless and disdainful, suddenly shook. He did not have time to turn around, but his perception surpassed his usual limits and landed on the middle-aged man. A weak, pale white flying sword was rapidly retreating, falling into the giant purple jade tree. At the same time, the strange middle-aged man, who had been convulsing and trembling and looked like he could not fight, sat up, and his fingers held terrifying power. Jean Mok's frown eased, and his mind opened. He finally understood where Ding Ning's next move was. He did not hold back his blade essence and decisively flew out. The black moon formed and immediately cut off the iron sword light that came out of the void in front of him, and then continued to move forward. In the ancestral lands, and even the entire world, wind and rain rose. A peerless sword essence swept up the wind and rain of the world and stabbed straight at Gu Huai's back. Gu Huai's puzzlement and shock caused him to be at a loss. He still had the power to kill Ding Ning and the others, but he did not want to die. The shadows of the small swords that were as heavy as mountains suddenly disappeared before they were about to crush Ding Ning and the others. It was as if all the power had been sucked back into his hands through the air. With a boom, the sword mountain did not appear, but the spirit of the sword mountain seemed to be in his hand. His right hand seemed to be holding a huge, invisible sword mountain, and he slashed at the wind and rain that filled the sky. At the same time, the fingers of his left hand flicked. A faint purple sword light seemed to cut through the void and cut open a round hole in front of Jean Mok's black moon. The sword essence in his left hand was empty and nimble, like it carried the presence of another space, and collided with Jean Mok's blade essence. The sword essence in his right hand was as heavy as a mountain, and fierce as it fought against the strange middle-aged man's peerless sword essence. In this moment, the power and presence he displayed was like that of a god. However, at the same time, an extremely shrill and furious roar burst out from his mouth. Chapter 476. No matter if it was the moon or the endless wind and rain, they were all blocked by his sword essence. Yet it was only the moon and the wind and rain that could not get close to his body. The vibrations from the collision of the powerful forces could not be pushed out and passed onto his body. Due to this, Gu Huai shouted in shock and fury. As he shouted, a huge boom came from his body. It was as if 2 monstrous wolves had collided in his body, and a loud rumble spread out. Suddenly, countless wrinkles appeared on his jade-like face. Sparkling lights flew out from these wrinkles, and each beam of light was like a broken saber intent or sword intent. Gu Huai's eyes were filled with disbelief and pain. He looked down at his body. A wound appeared on his abdomen. Blood gushed, and one could faintly see his organs. There were many tiny fragments floating on the internal organs, shining with some black light, like the dust in the wasteland. This wound was torn from the inside out. It was not caused by anyone present, but by Tang Xin in the previous battle. While he had used Zheng Xiu's power to kill Tang Xin, and Tang Xin was like a passerby he had encountered on the plains, in both mind and body, he had been greatly wounded, even though he had absorbed some spirit rain. When he reached the center of the ancestral lands, the spirit rain had stopped. So under the pressure from the inside and outside, the wounds caused by the sword and saber divine Emperor Tang Xian had first exploded. Looking at the furious Gu Huai, Jean Mok's eyes were filled with pity. From the moment the peerless wind and rain sword essence appeared, he knew that Gu Huai would undoubtedly die. A legendary person of the Bazin Kendo ground had died in such a simple way. Even he felt disbelief and sympathy. Yet he was still wary. Gu Huai knew his situation better than anyone else present, but other than shock and anger, he was also filled with disbelief. Like many people who were about to die, they did not believe they were about to die. But regardless of whether he believed it or not, he knew he was about to die. He looked up at Ding Ning. Other than the strange middle-aged man who was connected to the purple jade tree and had fallen back to the ground in the clash of sword essences, everyone understood his thoughts before death. A black dot appeared in the sky. Then it became a mountain. There were cracking sounds along the way. They did not know if it was the palace being crushed or space being torn apart. This sword mountain followed his gaze and landed on Ding Ning. The last thing you want to do before you die is to drag me down with you. Who do you benefit by doing this? Did I tell you to come here to kill me? You are about to die. Do you still care about her and Yuanwu's? Do you still care that I am stronger than you? You do not want to keep me alive and see what I can do to her and Yuanwu? Ding looked up at the sword mountain. The shadow and pressure of the sword mountain enveloped him. This Lingshu sword gate sect master's attack after he was certain he would die, even without Zheng Xiu's help, was still unimaginably powerful. It was even stronger than the sword essence he had used against Tang Xian. All the murderousness of this attack was on Ding Ning, but Ding Ning just looked calmly at the sword mountain descending from the sky and spoke with slight disdain. Gu Huai's body inexplicably trembled. It was not because of his injuries, but because of the violent fluctuations in his emotions. Ding Ning's first words had a great effect on his emotions and caused his sword essence to ripple. The sword essence of this attack was no longer perfect, but no matter how imperfect, it was still the attack of the master of Lingshu Sword Gate and the Sword Mountain Sword. Jean Mok's gaze was fixed on the Sword Mountain Sword. The moment the Sword Mountain Sword appeared in the sky and the murderous intent enveloped Ding Ning, a black curved blade appeared in his hands. There were countless mottled marks on this curved blade, like weathered agate. But each mottled mark that curved like a horse's hoof seemed to have the purest moonlight shining out. When Gu Huai's sword essence wavered, Jean Mok also made a choice. His hands gripped the hilt of this curved blade, and he gave a sharp howl. This blade seemed to have awakened and absorbed the soul of the indigo serpent that had just died here. In the chaotic wind, a true dragon shadow charged into the sky and hit the side of the Sword Mountain Sword hard. He did not want to take this attack head-on, just change the direction of this attack. As he wished, the Sword Mountain Sword gave off an unimaginable roar in the air and started to shift. In the air above, there were more explosions. Countless tiny black dots fell like rain. The mountain was collapsing from top to bottom. But this was just the beginning. The Sword Mountain Sword fell at an angle, and the blade brushed against the mountain wall. The entire ancestral mountain started to shake, and cracks appeared along the blade of the sword. But no one paid attention to this. While the Sword Mountain Sword had shifted, a sharp murderous intent still fell down along a seal script on the sword towards Ding Ning. Li Shixing's face paled. He knew that it was impossible for him to block the sword intent. In front of this sword essence, he was as minuscule as a fly under the tip of the sword. Even if he died, he would not be able to change the direction of the sword at all. But he still looked up and decisively swung his fanged sword upwards. An invisible wall with all of his power and intent swept through the air. But at this time, someone next to Ding Ning was faster than him. This person could only be Xin Xian. Because of Jean Mok's obstruction, he even had time to think. He knew that if he continued to block this attack, he would be more injured and may even die. But if he did not act, no one present could stop Ding Ning from being killed. So this was a great gamble. It was a gamble with his life on the line. The Li family? He thought for a moment and decided to take the gamble. Because if he lived like this, then there was no meaning in living. He attacked with his sword. A bloody mist rose up, like all of the blood that had floated in the great floating water prison for so many years had been brought up by his sword and surged towards the falling sword essence. Li Shixing's body shook. He didn't feel too much pressure, because this sword essence had already collided with Gu Huai's sword essence before him. Crack, 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 crack. Countless sounds of bones cracking sounded in Shun Xian's body. Along with the sounds of flesh tearing were even finer. Shun Xian smiled bleakly. He felt he had lost the gamble. The shattering of the bones did not mean death, but the tearing of the meridians and organs meant that even an expert like Gu Huai could not survive. For an expert like Gu Huai, even if it was an imperfect fighting spirit, it was enough to kill him in a head-on clash. It was as though he had taken Ding Ning's last killing intent. He smiled bleakly as he looked at Ding Ning. He even started to feel that all of this was Ding Ning's perfect trap. Because all of Ding Ning's previous performances had been too perfect, as though everything was as he had thought. You won the gamble. But at this time, Ding Ning said to him. Then he said softly, regardless of whether we will die here in the end, at least you will not die now. Ding Ning's hand landed on his body. Shun Xian heard many small sounds. It was like a hallucination before death, but the sound came from Ding Ning's body. Then he felt countless fine threads floating into his body. This feeling was like many small things in Ding Ning's body were spitting out threads and entering his body. But in the next moment, these threads turned into rain. He was shocked, not just because of the great vitality contained in the rain, but also because of the threads themselves. Chapter 477. When he saw Shun Xian use his sword to block his sword essence, Gu Huai felt that he had made a mistake in some areas from the start. From the start, Ding Ning had been able to defeat his sword moves not because of talent, but because he understood him very well. He seemed to be able to predict what sword move he would use next. This was not just familiarity with the sword manual he cultivated. One had to be familiar with his personality, habits, and everything else to be able to predict what sword move he would use. But because he had been too proud and confident, this feeling had not truly surfaced. Only now, when a person like Shun Xian dared to risk his life to block a sword for Ding Ning, did he start to realize. But he still could not understand. Other than that person, who would be so familiar with his sword moves in him. Even the other people of the Bazin Kendo ground, or that person's heir, could not do this. Why? He looked in disbelief at Ding Ning and said dazedly. The sword mountain sword did not continue to fall and was embedded in the mountain wall. Yet, the sword energy was still seeping into the mountain wall, and cracking sounds came from the mountain wall. There were also countless cracking sounds coming from Gu Huai's body. More wounds started to appear on the surface of his skin. These wounds came from a battle long ago. The ones who had left these wounds were the top existences of the world. But these wounds had originally healed, and even Gu Huai himself had not sensed them. But today his entire body was about to disintegrate. These flesh and bones that were slightly different from his body were first exposed like they were not part of his body. Shun Xian seemed to be bathing in the spring water of the fountain of youth. He felt the vitality that had left him fill his body again. The cracks in the deepest parts of his body quickly closed. He looked up and knew he would not die. Seeing the wounds on Gu Huai's body, he knew Gu Huai was going to die. Li Shixing's sword missed, and he felt uncomfortable. But when he saw himself, Hu Jingjing, and Ding Ning intact, he felt the air was exceptionally warm. Wu Lianzi was still sitting on the ground. Looking at this scene, for some reason, while he felt endless admiration for Ding Ning, he felt that Ding Ning was not happy right now. Gu Huai could not control his vital energy and his body's disintegration. For Jean Moke at this time, with just a thought, he could wipe Gu Huai out of this mountain valley. But he was not in a hurry to kill Gu Huai, and looked thoughtfully at Gu Huai and Ding Ning. Ding Ning did not immediately answer Gu Huai's question, but he started to walk towards Gu Huai. More sounds of ice cracking came from Gu Huai's body. Seeing Ding Ning walk over, for some reason, he felt terror, but he could not stop Ding Ning from coming closer. Ding Ning walked in front of him, and then looked at his gradually darkening eyes filled with ice cracks. He said seriously, I said before that you would be the first to die today. Gu Huai felt great pain, but he could not be angry or respond because this had become reality. When I detected that I could use this thing to cut off your connection with Zheng Xiu, you were fated to die today. Ding Ning looked at him and said, to Zheng Xiu, you are just a dog. Many people do not treat you like a dog, but you are willing to be a dog and help her kill those who do not treat you like a dog. You are the heir to the 9-death silkworm, his disciple. Gu Huai looked at Xin Xian, who had not died. Many scenes flashed through his mind. He seemed to finally understand something and spoke. His voice sounded like it was cracking, and it was unclear. Yet other than Shun Xian and Zhan Mok, the other 3 people present, even Li Shixing seemed to be hit by an invisible hammer and started to tremble all over. Ding Ning did not deny it. He calmly reached out with his hand. Gu Huai had used up all his strength and was about to collapse and die. But just like Xin Xian, a fresh presence entered Gu Huai's heart through his hand and allowed him to maintain his present state. Answer one of my questions, and I will tell you a secret. Ding Ning looked at Gu Huai, whose face was twisted due to his strong emotions, and said softly, but with unusual sincerity. Gu Huai's mood suddenly became incomparably nervous and said, What? Ding Ning said, Where is the great punishment sword? Gu Huai's eyes widened to the extreme, and his lips began to crack. I do not know where it is. It is not at my Lingshu sword gate. He sensed that Ding Ning did not give him much time. So while his emotions fluctuated even more, he still spoke immediately. Ding Ning frowned slightly. Strictly speaking, Gu Huai had not given him an answer to his question. However, this at least removed one of his important assumptions, allowing him to vaguely come up with an answer in his heart. So he took half a step forward and whispered by Gu Huai's ear. When the plum blossoms turn yellow, watch me cut that person's face. This was a sentence that seemed unrelated to this time, and the words themselves were strange. But Gu Huai knew the meaning of the words. This was an old saying. Many years ago, in a plum forest, when a drizzle was falling, someone had said this to him when they were drinking tea and discussing the sword. At the time, the plum blossoms in the forest were still green, and there were about 2 months until the plum blossoms turned yellow. There was a famous female swordsman in Chongling. She was not pretty, but loved to be beautiful. She thought she was extraordinary and had a bad personality. She had formed a grudge with them. But that female swordsman had been much stronger than them at the time. In his view, 2 months of cultivation could not win against that female swordsman. But in the end, that person really had a breakthrough in 2 months and did everything the word said. Only he and that person knew of this matter. Gu Huai could not understand his own emotions at this time. He felt extremely cold, like countless snowflakes were embedded in his body. He looked into Ding Ning's eyes and saw a certain truth. You are not. You are. He saw a certain truth, but his face seemed to see countless untruths. He trembled violently as he spoke, but Ding Ning did not give him time to finish. His body completely disintegrated at this time. His entire body shattered into countless fragments at the same time. Like shattered glass, they shattered and scattered everywhere. Looking at Gu Huai, who had turned to dust, everyone felt it was unreal. However, the sword mountain sword embedded in the mountain wall reminded everyone that this was incomparably real. The sect master of Lingshu Sword Gate, coming out of the mountain for the first time after many years, was killed here. What is and what is not? Zhan Mok took a deep breath, and then an inexplicable smile appeared on his lips as he looked at Ding Ning and asked, What I am is not important. Ding Ning looked up at him and said slowly, The key is who you are, the last of Tianliang. Zhan Mok nodded. His movements were unusually slow. Why do you say, I am the last of Tianliang? If you are not from Tianliang, how can you set up such a trap? Ding Ning's gaze passed through the calm air of the valley and landed on his slightly pale face. Since the people of Tianliang treat this ancestral land as a holy land and do not allow anyone to enter, then if there are other people of Tianliang, how can they allow you to set up such a trap and enter here? Hearing Ding Ning's words, Zhan Mok laughed, sad and emotional. You are right, but I still entered here. Chapter 478. Legends are just legends. I want to hear the complete true story. Ding Ning looked at Jean Moque, who was smiling emotionally. He glanced at the purple jade tree that was still intact from the battle and said, I want to know what is inside. Jean Moque put away his smile and looked strangely at Ding Ning. He said with slight disdain, Since what you are is not important, then what need do I have to tell you the true story? There is a need. Ding Ning laughed. He did not look at Jean Moque, but at Wu Lianzi, who was sitting on the ground. He said, We may not be a match for you, but we should be able to kill him before you kill us. Jean Moque followed Ding Ning's gaze and looked at Wu Lianzi. He said scornfully, Kill him? Ding Ning looked at him and said calmly, While I do not know why you had to bring him here, since you brought him here and let him live, you must have your reasons. Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing stilled and could not help but exchange a look. Wu Lianzi was also stunned. Previously, no one had realized this. Only when Ding Ning said this did everyone realize that Wu Lianzi was of no use to this setup and seemed to be an outsider. Yet colluding with the mistress of the Qin dynasty and opening the ancestral lands was not something that needed to be witnessed. Jean Moque would not be so bored as to bring an unrelated person here. Also, Wu Lianzi was the prince of Wuji. Before he was 100% sure he would get what was in the ancestral lands, bringing someone of Wu Lianzi's status with him was unnecessary. There had to be a reason for being unnecessary. How old are you? Jean Moque was silent for a moment and then shook his head coldly. Then he looked at Ding Ning and said sincerely, If I let you live for a dozen more years, who in the world can defeat you? Ding Ning's expression did not change. He said, You flatter me. Shen Xian suddenly became nervous. He coughed up blood twice. He sensed the primal energies of the universe around Jean Moque change. But at this time, Ding Ning turned to look at him. He saw the meaning in Ding Ning's eyes and stopped. A cracking sound was heard. There was only one sound, but the strange middle-aged man who was connected to the giant purple jade tree by fleshy feelers instantly broke into countless pieces. Purplish-red mucus and pieces of meat fell to the ground. He no longer looked like a human. Before the sound could be heard, a flying sword covered in countless fine flowers silently withdrew from the middle-aged man's body and flew to Ding Ning's side. The purple jade-like tree began to tremble in pain. Jean Moque did not look at the pieces flowing in the purplish-red mucus or the giant tree. He looked expressionlessly at Ding Ning's flying sword. Then he said, This person was once the top swordsman of Tianliang Kingdom at its peak, the Tianliang Army's Grand Marshal Tuoba Wuchou. His peerless wind and rain sword was invincible for a time. While you defeated his peerless wind and rain sword, he is at most 70% of his peak and has lost his ability to react. They cannot be compared. Ding Ning nodded sincerely. If he was at his peak, this person was invincible for a time. When Tianliang was at its peak, this city may not have been as large as Chongling, but the number of powerful cultivators would not have been less than Chongling, or even less than Chongling when the Bazinkindo ground was at its peak. Jean Moque was not in a hurry and said slowly, Li Shixing, Hu Jingjing, and the others thought of the stone beasts that recorded many sword manuals and were certain that Jean Moque spoke the truth. Ding Ning did not speak. He looked at Jean Moque and waited for him to continue. A moment of silence. Jean Moque did not speak and looked silently at the enormous purple jade-like tree. This? Hu Jingjing exclaimed again. There was no change in energy, but the enormous purple jade-like tree not far from her, Ding Ning and the others, was quickly withering. The purple faded. The purple liquid inside the enormous purple jade-like tree seemed to rot and seeped out of the tree patterns. The glowing would turn gray and withered as the purple liquid seeped out, and was no different from ordinary rotten wood. You may think that this strange tree gave him life, Jean Moque said. Looking at the enormous tree that was quickly turning into rotten wood, he coldly shook his head and said, But the truth is the opposite. He gave this tree life. While everyone else was still in shock and bewilderment, Ding Ning seemed to have guessed the answer long ago. He looked at the rapidly rotting tree and said, So this tree is just like a prison to him, imprisoning him here. If he leaves the tree, both the tree, and he will truly die. A hint of cruelty appeared at the corners of Jean Moc's mouth. His voice was slightly cold as he said, "His existence here is to kill everyone who tries to reach the final truth here." Ding Ning said naturally, "Then what is the truth of your former Tianliang that contradicts the legends?" Jean Moc sneered. "This is not a redemption from the plague. From beginning to end, it is a massacre caused by choice." Ding Ning looked calmly at him and said, "I would like to hear the details." Jean Moc's face darkened. Tianliang was blessed from the ancestral mountain. The ancestral mountain had many spirit veins, so Tianliang naturally rose from the plains and became the strongest country outside the pass. But it was not strong for more than 100 years. One day, a meteor fell from the sky and landed on the ancestral mountain. Ding Ning nodded and said, "Here?" Jean Moc nodded coldly and said, "Meteors commonly seen in the desert contain many treasures such as celestial metal and are used for forging. But this meteor contains medicinal power that can make one's bones grow. When it was smashed into the spirit veins, it formed an eternal spring." Even more astounding was that this meteor gave birth to something strange. When a cultivator obtained it, their cultivation would increase greatly, and their lifespan would be endless, as though they were truly immortal. Endless lifespan, as though they were truly immortal. Hearing this, Li Shixing, Hu Jingjing, and Wu Lianzi, even Xin Xian was shocked speechless. The elixir of immortality only existed in legends. If a cultivator was truly immortal, they would have endless cultivation. What kind of cultivation experience would they accumulate, and what kind of existence would they become? But at this time, Ding Ning said calmly, just like the master of this peerless wind and rain sword, Tobo Wucho, turning into grass and wood. Jean Moc looked away from the rotting tree and said, "Similar." Ding Ning thought seriously and said, "So in the past, some people of Tianliang wanted to use the thing born from the meteor to become immortal, and some people of Tianliang thought this was against the order of the world. Because of their different choices, it led to rebellion and massacre?" Even though he had a high opinion of Ding Ning in his heart, when he saw Ding Ning easily think of such a matter, his shock grew. He nodded and said coldly, "When the meteor fell and formed the eternal spring, it was a blessing from the heavens for Tianliang. But it was also a great change. At the time, the emperor of Tianliang naturally sealed it so no one could get close. So when they found the thing born from the meteor, the first to use it was the Tianliang imperial family. Since it is an elixir of life, even if one's body becomes not flesh and blood, it is not a terrifying thing for cultivators." Ding Ning looked at Jean Moc and said, "The emperor used it, and the subordinates rebelled. I think it must be because this elixir of life is not perfect. What is not good about it?" Jean Moc looked deeply at Ding Ning and did not deny it. He said slowly, "But that thing is like a living being. If one uses that thing, while one can live forever and quickly recover from serious wounds, some of one's consciousness will disappear, and there will be different consciousnesses. Simply speaking, one's personality will change greatly, like becoming a completely different person." Hu Jingjing sucked in a cold breath. She felt cold and unconsciously moved closer to Li Shixing. Ding Ning took a deep breath and said slowly, "It is like becoming someone else, like one's past is completely changed. One's view of one's friends, family, and even one's lover will change. Familiar people will become strangers, and even enemies. This is a terrifying thing, and most people cannot accept it." Jean Moc sneered and said, "Even more importantly, some people can accept it." Chapter 479. In order to obtain supreme cultivation, some people cultivated silent meditation and never spoke to the people close to them. They only thought about the primal energies of the universe. Some people abandoned their wives and children just to give up foreign objects. Some even mutilated their own limbs, wanting to change into a human body. These people completely changed because of cultivation. What is the difference from using that thing to change? Jean Moc narrowed his eyes and said, "At the time, many Tianliang cultivators thought that this was the evil path, the reincarnation of an otherworldly demon. Even if they thought the evil path was nothing, these cultivators wanted to kill all these people who made different choices because they did not want to. The matters of the past are matters of the past. Everyone has different opinions. Ding Ning looked at John Moke and said. Everyone could hear his meaning. When the same story was told by different people, it would have different emotions. Ding Ning only wanted to hear the story itself and did not want any emotions mixed in. What happened next, in short, is similar to what you guessed. Jean Moke looked expressionlessly at the withered tree. A group of cultivators led by the peerless Wind and Rain Sword formed a rebel army and attacked the Imperial Palace, where the ancestral mountain was. The Imperial Palace did not have many people, but they took over the ancestral land, had the Fountain of Youth to heal injuries, and threw out the elixir of life for those who did great deeds. So even though the rebel army surrounded the ancestral land, they were unable to take it down. The battle grew more intense, and in the end, the ancestral land was flattened. The rebel army was many times the Imperial Palace. In the end, they took down the ancestral mountain, but a new battle started. Some people in the rebel army fought to the death to enter the ancestral mountain because they wanted to take the elixir of life for themselves. When Jean Moke said this, he turned to look at Wu Lianzi and said with slight disdain, Tianliang no longer exists. To the rebel army, the greatest threat is the other tribes in the plains. The tribes of the plains who know the truth have led their armies here. Most of them want to take the elixir of life for themselves. Wu Lianzi immediately shouted as though he had been greatly insulted. He said angrily, Wuji respects this ancestral land like a god. Each generation swears to protect this ancestral land. How can they want to take the elixir of life for themselves? Don't be in such a hurry. I'm not done yet. Jean Moke looked at the furious Wu Lianzi and smiled coldly. Your Wuji stood firmly on the side of the rebel army, led by the peerless Wind and Rain Sword. So the final result was that the tribes of the wilderness who wanted to fight for the elixir of life were all annihilated, and your Wuji replaced Tianliang as the largest empire in the wilderness. Wu Lianzi had not expected Jean Moke to say this, and was momentarily stunned. So the final winners were the rebel army led by the peerless Wind and Rain Sword, the Wuji royal family, the people in the stone coffins. Ding Ning's expression was still calm. He looked at Jean Moke and asked, since the peerless Wind and Rain Sword and the others did not want to take the elixir of life, and thought it was an evil thing, they naturally wanted to destroy it when they won. But you schemed so hard because you want the elixir of life. This means that they could not destroy the elixir of life with their power. So in the end, they could only make many arrangements and seal it. As expected, your comprehension is the best in the world. Even your deduction is correct. Jean Moke looked at Ding Ning and said with some regret, in the end, the victorious Tianliang people led by the peerless Wind and Rain Sword could not destroy the elixir of life, so they decided to stay in the ancestral mountain and not take a step out. At the same time, they set up killing traps in the ancestral mountain so that the experts outside could not enter. It has been too long, and even the Taodai beasts have died of old age. Otherwise, just the Taodai and the chaos insects would not be able to get close to the ancestral mountain. Jean Moke sneered again. In the end, the peerless Wind and Rain Sword was still not reassured. He used the elixir of life himself. Before his personality changed, he merged himself with the tree and became the last guard of the elixir of life. The peerless Wind and Rain Sword was so strong and had the power of the elixir of life. He could fight continuously as though he was immortal. Even if thousands of soldiers came here, they would probably be turned to dust by his sword essence. I set up this trap to see if you had other ways to break the primal energies of the universe here, or change the way the tree communicates with him to get him out of the guard. But I had not expected you to use these people to break it. The Wuji helped the rebel army with all their power, and in the end, it was these people who ended the enemy tribes on the plains. In the end, they were not willing to die in the ancestral mountain, so they left according to their oath, and swore that their descendants would treat the ancestral mountain as a forbidden land and never enter. But the Wuji also had a trick. When the peerless wind and rain sword and the others set up the seal, they secretly did something to the seal, like setting up a shortcut. How can it be like this? Impossible. You must be lying. Wu Lianzi shouted dazedly. The Wuji have sworn to protect the ancestral mountain for generations. I have never heard of... Of course you did not know. Before he finished shouting, Jean Moque interrupted him with a cold smile. Long before the Wuji officially established the country, the few people who knew were already dead. Wu Lianzi was stunned again. Before he could react, Ding Ning looked at Jean Moque and said, "So your branch should have been a member of the rebel army, but in the end, you were not willing to die in the ancestral mountain and left with the Wuji people. And your ancestors learned the secret from the few people who knew." After a pause, Ding Ning looked at Jean Moque and said, "If my guess is correct, I fear the deaths of the Wuji people are related to your branch." "You guessed wrong." Jean Moque laughed and said, "While our branch did not want to die in the ancestral mountain on the surface, in reality, we were ordered by the peerless wind and rain sword to follow the Wuji and wait for a chance to kill the Wuji people to prevent future troubles. So the hearts of the peerless wind and rain sword are much colder than you imagine. Your branch carried the mission of completely hiding the secrets of the ancestral mountain. But after learning from the Wuji people that the Wuji left behind a secret that could lead to the elixir of life, you changed your mind?" Ding Ning's expression did not change, and he continued to ask calmly. Jean Moque's eyebrows rose slightly, and he did not immediately answer. Ding Ning looked at him and smiled faintly. "So those people did not forget their mission, but when it came to you, you wanted to obtain the elixir of life in the ancestral mountain." Jean Moque's disdainful smile completely disappeared and turned into coldness. He took a deep breath and looked at Ding Ning. He said, "My ancestors should have all committed suicide after completing their mission, but one of them had a pregnant wife. He committed suicide and left behind his pregnant wife. Unexpectedly, that wife happened to secretly hear some of their matters. So this secret was passed down from generation to generation until it reached my hands. If those people had no selfish motives, how could this secret reach my hands?" Jean Moque looked coldly at Ding Ning and asked, "Today, I have my own selfish motives. I feel that rather than carrying a mission that has nothing to do with me, I should try to obtain the elixir of life myself. What is wrong with that? Also, I do not have many true friends on the plains. If I can obtain longevity, so what if my personality changes? A fraction of myself is still myself." Li Shixing frowned inexplicably as he heard this. Yet Ding Ning did not refute any of Jean Moque's words. He looked calmly at Wu Lianzi and said, "So there will be powerful restrictions next. Just by using Wu Lianzi, you can pass through those powerful restrictions and truly get close to the elixir of life. If I am not wrong this time, the shortcut to the elixir of life must be opened with the direct bloodline of the Wuji royal family." Jean Moque looked up slightly at Ding Ning and said, "You guessed correctly this time." Ding Ning smiled and did not ask any more questions. Jean Moque did not speak. The air in the valley seemed to suddenly grow cold and sticky. Since there were no more questions, they would welcome the final battle. Chapter 480. Everyone's attention gathered on Ding Ning. At this time, Jean Moque should be in charge, but for some reason, everyone felt that the crux of the matter was Ding Ning's choice. Ding Ning glanced calmly at Wu Lianzi behind Jean Moque and did not speak. Jean Moque looked at him confidently and coldly. He said, "You cannot kill him." Ding Ning shook his head and continued to look at Wu Lianzi. He said, "I do not mean that. I am saying that he should know what to do." Wu Lianzi understood the meaning of Ding Ning's words. He felt that Ding Ning was right, so he did not hesitate. All of his vital energy turned into a wild storm that raged through his body. Blood kill. Break city. Heavenly light. Ding Ning still looked at Wu Lianzi, but his left hand reached out like before as he recited 3 sword moves. "You think you can kill him like this?" Jean Moque sneered. The crescent blade appeared in front of him again. Yet, It gave off a powerful sword essence. The peerless storm that had disappeared from the valley reappeared. Countless fine raindrops spun violently around him and Wu Lianzi. The terrifying power immediately locked down all of Wu Lianzi's vital energy, and then caused Wu Lianzi's vital energy to flow along the path Jean Moque wanted. The layers of raindrops formed a curtain that intersected into countless layers of worlds. The energy that supported these curtains came from Jean Moque himself. This was likely the strongest defensive sword essence in the world, like using countless small worlds to separate oneself from the world. When Li Shixing sensed the rise of this sword essence, he felt that he could not break through this sword essence defense and kill Wu Lianzi. Yet the moment he instinctively attacked according to Ding Ning's sword essence, he felt something was wrong. When he, Sun Xian, and Hu Jingjing attacked together, the sword essence was not killing, but defense. With a boom, the giant tree that had completely decayed was first torn into countless pieces by the surging power of the Yuan Qi. Before the sword intent had completely formed, Ding Ning's body had already floated up and landed in the middle of the shattered giant tree. Only now did Jean Moque sense that something was wrong and that Ding Ning's target was not Wu Lianzi. A fierce roar came from his mouth. From the curtain formed by countless raindrops, a line of rain flew out with a mournful, murderous intent, falling towards Ding Ning. Go! But looking at the incoming rain, Ding Ning uttered a simple word. He said this to Li Shixing, Sun Xian, and Hu Jingjing. He did not care about the rain at all. In the next moment, his figure passed through the fragments of the giant tree and disappeared into the well that was heading downwards. A loud thud was heard. The rain line flying towards him seemed to have hit an invisible giant bell in the air. With this sound, the rain line shattered into thousands of thin lines, like a strange ice flower that bloomed on a pure, straight, transparent mirror. Li Shixing, Sun Xian, and Hu Jingjing's figures landed at the well. Jean Moque's face twisted slightly. The curved blade in front of him was about to fly out. But at this time, he sensed a sword essence that had disappeared long ago and looked up into the sky. An enormous shadow fell down. The moment he raised his head, the sword mountain sword that was embedded in the mountain wall had already fallen down. Faint starlight flowed on the sword mountain sword. The sword mountain sword carried Gu Huai's true sword essence and gave off terrifying presence and true power. But the starlight carried some warmth. It did not come from Zheng Xiao. Another loud bang resounded between heaven and earth. The curved blade that had been moving forward suddenly turned and collided with the sword mountain sword. It was as if there were countless hot springs exploding inside the mountain wall, and hundreds of explosions occurred at the same time. The heavy sword mountain sword was forced to the side by his blade. The shadow left his and Wu Lianzi's bodies. Jean Moque grunted. Determination flashed through Wu Lianzi's eyes again. At this time, his vital energy started to flow again. But at the same time, Jean Moque retreated in front of him and pointed at him. Pew 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 pew. The vital energy that had just flowed through Wu Lianzi's body was forced out by Jean Moque. Even many of his joints and muscles were shaken apart by Jean Moque. With a cry of pain, Wu Lianzi's eyes were furious, but he could not resist at all. Jean Moque's body shook slightly, and blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. He looked at the well where Ding Ning and the others had disappeared. The shock and fury in his eyes were no less than Wu Lianzi's. Forcefully twisting the sword essence and stopping Wu Lianzi's suicide while his vital energy was still surging, he had suffered some internal injuries. In that short time, it seemed that Ding Ning had said something to Wu Lianzi. He had misunderstood Ding Ning's meaning and suffered internal injuries. But guiding 3 swords to defend against his attack and activating the sword mountain sword, including the faint twining starlight on the sword mountain, there were many frightening possibilities. Even more importantly, all of this, including his injuries, seemed to have been within Ding Ning's calculations from the start. The stone steps down the well were not long. In a dozen breaths, the stone steps disappeared in front of Ding Ning and the others who had jumped into the well after him. They were not descendants of Tianliang like Jean Moque, and could not guess what was going on here. but in their imaginations, especially in the imaginations of people like Li Shixing, who had participated in the Min Mountain Sword Trials, this place was like the secret grounds of the Min Mountain Sword Trials, a vast world. However, to everyone's surprise, what appeared in front of them was a catacomb that they could see all around at a glance. It was like an underground training ground that many sects had dug out. It was only a few hundred feet wide. The scenery was very simple. There was only a black steel, a spring, and behind the spring was a golden pagoda. The black steel looked like a stone steel, but made of some kind of black agate material. It was as tall as a person and was engraved with densely packed characters. The spring water behind the black steel was milky white. What was truly astounding was that the spring water gave off thick spirit energy. In Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing's perception, it was no different from the eternal spring at the foot of the Mountain of Ancestors. The golden pagoda behind the spring was the most obvious, about 3 people tall. It did not look dazzling, but there was no other source of light in this cave. At this time, it was no different from the brightness outside. All the light seemed to come from this ordinary-looking golden pagoda that seemed to be made of pure gold. The unusually simple scene and the unusualness of these simple things formed an indescribable conflict. Hu Jingjing took many breaths to recover her normal breathing. Her gaze landed on the milky white spirit spring. She could not help but say, "That is also the eternal spring?" No one answered her. Li Shixing turned to look behind him. If he wants to come down, he has already come down. Ding Ning shook his head and asked, "Do you recognize these characters?" In front of them, only the black steel had characters. So Ding Ning naturally asked if Li Shixing recognized the characters on the black steel. Li Shixing took a deep breath and looked at the black steel closest to them. After a moment of silence, he nodded and said, "This is very similar to the characters of the present Wuji, but there are more strokes. But most of the meaning can be figured out. Then it is similar to what I think. These are the characters of the past Tianliang, and the characters of Tianliang should be the predecessor of the Wuji characters." Ding Ning nodded calmly and said, "What is written on it?" As Ding Ning spoke, he stood motionless where he was. Li Shixing, Hu Jingjing, and Xun Xian also stood motionless. The simpler the things here, the more likely they were to contain great danger, especially when Zhang Moke did not immediately follow. So Li Shixing did not immediately answer. He carefully read all the words on the black stone tablet again, and then slowly said as he read, "What is recorded here is the true record of the destruction of Tianliang and the ancestral lands of Tianliang. The specific records are similar to what Zhang Moke said, but the one who set up this tablet was the leader of the rebel army, the peerless wind and rain sword. He described the elixir of life as an evil from the heavens. As the demon star fell, anyone who touched the elixir of life would be possessed by the evil from the heavens, their minds taken over, and they would become walking corpses. Because the evil absorbs all the primal energies of the universe, metal, water, fire, and other things cannot be destroyed. He could only set up a golden pagoda to seal it. He sacrificed himself to become a guard and begged those who passed him to never open the golden pagoda after seeing this steel. Otherwise, it would be a great calamity. Chapter 481. After hearing this, Ding Ning did not immediately say anything and just stood there silently. Hu Jingjing did not know what Ding Ning was waiting for, but her gaze unconsciously landed on the spring behind the stone steel. After being healed by the fountain of youth, this kind of spring had an indescribable attraction to her. "So we are in a killing trap?" But at this time, Xun Xian's voice sounded behind her. Hu Jingjing's body shook slightly, and she turned in puzzlement. She saw Xun Xian looking at Ding Ning and waiting for Ding Ning's answer. Ding Ning nodded. Hu Jingjing still could not understand. Next to her, Li Shixing glanced at her and said, "Do you not sense any special presence?" Hu Jingjing nodded. Li Shixing said coldly, "If there is no special killing intent, there is killing intent everywhere." Hu Jingjing's body froze slightly. She immediately understood why even Ding Ning was motionless. Perhaps even a small change could change the space they were in and trigger a terrifying killing intent. Killing the peerless wind and rain sword may be difficult, but it is not impossible. Jean Moque had to bring the Wuji royal bloodline here. This means that the killing trap here should be stronger than the peerless wind and rain sword. Xinxian looked at everyone and said, "And now, we are in this killing trap." Hearing Xinxian's words, Hu Jingjing unconsciously swallowed and looked down. Even the act of swallowing his saliva seemed to have become somewhat difficult. The ground an inch in front of her feet looked ordinary, but it seemed to be covered in countless invisible needles that prevented her from moving. Jean Moque could use Wu Lianzi to bypass the killing trap and get the elixir of life, but they would be trapped here. Xinxian's gaze landed on Ding Ning's face again. Is there any other way? Li Shixing did not lose confidence. He looked at the frowning Ding Ning and said softly, "Can you defeat it?" "Too strong, we cannot defeat it." Ding Ning shook his head and said, "But we can tie Jean Moque to us." This time, even Hu Jingjing immediately understood the meaning of his words. Ding Ning alone could not understand and resolve this killing trap that had gathered the efforts of many Tianliang experts. But he could destroy some places and change the shortcut left behind by the Wuji royal family. If they could not use the shortcut left behind by the Wuji royal family, then Jean Moque would be dragged into the same situation. The peerless wind and rain sword is an extremely meticulous person. At the same time, he is also a very ruthless person. For someone who can be so ruthless to himself, the final trap he set up will not be simple. Ding Ning did not look at Hu Jingjing and Li Shixing. He turned to look at Xinxian. Most importantly, what do you think of the elixir of life? Jean Moque calmly walked on the cracked stone coffin. Wu Lianzi's body was wrapped in the energy he slowly released. He floated behind him and followed his footsteps. Do not look at me like this. If not for the fact that your Wuji ancestors were not as noble as you imagine, there would not be today's result. He did not look back at Wu Lianzi and said coolly, "This is karma." He stopped in front of a stone coffin. In reality, each stone coffin had some unnoticed marks. These marks were the names of the people in the coffins. What was wrong with the cultivators who supported the Tianliang emperor in the past? But these rebels succeeded in the end. They could rest in the coffins, and the other people's corpses were exposed in the wilderness. Is the peerless wind and rain sword considered noble? He sneered and reached down. His movements were very gentle, like he was caressing his lover's body. The lid of the stone coffin and the bones inside silently turned to dust and were blown away. Many faint lights appeared on the surface of the stone coffin. As his vital energy flowed in, these lights gradually connected together and formed dozens of seal lines. Before his voice dissipated, dozens of wounds appeared on Wu Lianzi's body. Blood flowed out of these wounds like dozens of keys that entered the dozens of seal lines. An inexplicable roar sounded in the world. A presence that had been sealed for a long time gushed out of the stone coffin like a fountain. In the next instant, all of the stone coffins shattered. Countless fragments flew up like rain, and then turned into stars of light that burned. The burning stars brushed past Jean Moque's skin and left behind scorch marks. These scorch marks seemed to seep into his body, but Jean Moque's eyes burned with an even hotter flame. The stone coffin in front of him had turned into countless stars, but the dozens of seal lines were still carved in the air and grew brighter. As Wu Lianzi's blood flowed in, the seal lines cut through space like bloody blades. In his perception, these seal lines were about to cut through the energy that had been trapped for countless years, like opening a door. He did not know how many years of planning and effort had been used to exchange for today's success. Even though his heart was like stone, he started to feel joy. The world after these seal lines cut through was a new world for him. But in this moment, he looked down in shock, and his face paled. A flower bloomed on the right side of his chest. A bright flower of blood. In the next moment, he gave a scream more shrill than a wounded beast. His vital energy surged furiously in front of him. The crescent moon-like blade vibrated crazily, and countless golden flames ignited on its surface. The originally blood-colored seal lines completely collapsed. In the space that had been cut by the blood-colored seal lines, there were golden lines that contained terrifying, murderous intent. These golden lines cut through his life bond item and left marks on the surface of the blade. When the life bond item of any person was damaged, it meant that their cultivation and power in battle would decrease. Any cultivator would feel heartache. But what caused him even more heartache was that the door that was about to open had disappeared. He seemed to have entered a sea. It was a raging sea. Ding Ning looked up. The moment he did so, countless golden meteors appeared in the air above his head. The ground where he, Li Shixing, and the others were was not far from the stone coffins. But in his sight, those golden meteors seemed to be falling from a great height. His brows furrowed. The last flower remnant sword that had flown to an unknown location appeared in the air in front of him. Then this sword light carved out 3 light marks in the air in front of him. The moment each light mark appeared, Ding Ning coughed up blood. He coughed up 3 mouthfuls of blood. Those golden meteors suddenly started to burn. They started to burn in the space just a few feet above their heads, turning to hot ash that floated away. "Do not move." Ding Ning's face was so pale it was bloodless, but he said with unusual determination. 2 human figures appeared above the flying hot dust. It was as if they were attracted by the living spring. They were hurtling towards the living spring like meteorites. The flying ash was hot but quickly cooled. When it landed on the ground, it turned into cold snow. Hu Jingjing looked at where the 2 figures landed and couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. Everything had changed. Where the cold snow landed, the inscriptions on the black steel in front of her, Ding Ning and the others seemed to float. The entire steel was wrapped around by the floating inscriptions and gave off terrifying murderousness. The living spring that was emitting white spirit chi had already turned black in the instant the cold snow fell. Furthermore, it no longer had the smell that she was familiar with. It was like a huge black mouth that led to the netherworld, waiting for the 2 figures to descend from above. Chapter 482. Li Shixing was steadier than any Chongling talent of his age, but the shock in his eyes was greater than Hu Jingjing's. He knew more than Hu Jingjing. Mo Shouqing had passed away, but in order to compensate Li Shixing, or rather, the Li family, Mo Shouqing had given his city-guarding sword to Li Shixing. This city-guarding sword was related to the concept of space. The concept of space was not hard to understand for cultivators. When ordinary people saw a straight line, they would think that it was the shortest distance between 2 objects. But for cultivators, between this straight line, there were countless paths through which primal energies of the universe flowed. When objects walked through these paths, there were countless possibilities. They could be faster or very slow, or like passing through space, or like elongating space. These truths were easy to understand, but for cultivators to use them, it was as difficult as building a unique world of their own. The bottom of the stone coffins above their heads was not far from them. When the stone coffins shattered, the light and dust fell down like they were falling from the sky. This space had been turned into a special world by the unimaginable methods of the former Tianliang experts. Those 2 figures were naturally Zhan Moke and Wu Lianzi. They had fallen for a long time in the air, but they were still a long way from the spring. This restriction has completely changed our senses. Li Shixing struggled to turn his head and look at Ding Ning. So that spring is not the fountain of youth. Ding Ning nodded. Hu Jingjing came to her senses. She thought about how she couldn't control her desire to enter the fountain of youth. Those who had seen the wonders of the fountain of youth in the outside world would probably not be able to control their desire after seeing the fountain of youth. They would definitely not be able to control themselves and enter it. A cultivator's senses were usually more reliable than their eyes and nose. But the restriction here could even deceive perception. This was terrifying for any cultivator. If their senses were deceived, any flying sword that flew close could easily kill them. "We will not be spared," Shen Xian suddenly said. Shen Xian suddenly spoke. His cold voice trembled slightly. "Yes, we can't be spared." Before Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing could understand the meaning of Shen Xian's words, Ding Ning nodded calmly. He looked at Xin Xian and said seriously, "But you still cannot act. Your injuries are still more serious than his, and his cultivation is higher than yours. As long as his injuries are lighter than yours, we won't be able to win. We have to take a gamble." Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing still could not understand Ding Ning's words, but when Ding Ning finished speaking, they understood. Zhang Moke and Wu Lianzi's figures were still falling. At this time, they had not truly touched the spring. Yet, each character that appeared on the stone steel started to spin rapidly, and each character gave off a roar. These black characters brought with them streaks of black light, revolving around the stone tablet and forming a black whirlpool. The water in the living spring also began to spin rapidly, forming a similar black whirlpool. The primal energies of the universe in this space were moved by these two whirlpools. The air condensed into countless black ribbons of light. Each ribbon of light started to spin like a saw blade. Countless saw blades spun in this space. No one in this space could avoid it. At this time, the primal energies of the universe in this space had just started to condense, but Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing already felt pain coming from many parts of their bodies. Their bodies would be cut into countless pieces. Zhang Moke was in this space. If Zhang Moke's attack could not cause a fundamental change in this space, then all of them would die together. This was Ding Ning's gamble. The black ribbons of light formed completely. The entire space was strangely filled and divided by the ribbons of light. Ding Ning, Li Shixing, Hu Jingjing, and Xin Xian all had lines of blood that stretched straight to the ground. Blood started to seep out of the lines. Xin Xian's lips trembled slightly. His left hand tightened into a fist. But looking at the bloody lines on Ding Ning's face and his calm gaze, he did not do anything else. Gray frost suddenly appeared in the black ribbons of light. The gray frost seemed to be changing again in an instant, turning into raindrops. But with a boom, an enormous sound seemed to explode in the distant clouds. All the black ribbons of light suddenly disappeared, and patches of darkness, like the deepest dark clouds, surged through the gaps of these dark clouds, as if countless bolts of lightning were about to shoot out. A hint of true joy finally appeared in Ding Ning's calm gaze. He knew he had won the gamble. The last flower remnant sword that had been stuck to his back like a piece of spine flew up. With a low shout, all of the vital essence in his energy was forced out of his arms in an instant. More than a dozen vital energy flows with bloody essence flowed into the flying short sword. In this moment, the sword threads of the last flower remnant sword spread above his head like a red flower blooming. Ding Ning's hair was lifted by the sword energy and danced upwards. Because the vital energy flow was so intense, even the tiny blood vessels in his eyes exploded, causing his eyes to turn blood red. Li Shixing's breathing stopped completely. He had never seen Ding Ning have such fighting spirit, such murderousness, and such terror. That red sword flower seemed to come from hell. Each of the sword threads emitted an indescribably terrifying aura. Evil sea flower. Xin Xian's clenched fists were bleeding. Because he had used too much strength, his fingernails had pierced his flesh, but he did not notice it. Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing did not know, but he had seen such a sword move and felt such a sword essence. 3 years before the Yuanwu Emperor ascended the throne, in the battle where that person died, there had been such a sword essence at the top of the Tower of Corpses. Many bloody bolts of lightning had appeared in the black world. Each bolt of lightning was a sword essence spilling out of a sword thread. Countless holes were pierced through the dark clouds in the deepest part of the sky by these blood-red lightning bolts, as if they were corroding them. Countless streams of energy gushed out crazily. Defend the city. Round light. Ding Ning spat out a mouthful of blood, but at the same time, he looked forward and said the names of 2 sword moves. Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing attacked. The 2 sword essences collided in front of them and then merged together almost perfectly. Boom! But in the next moment, Ding Ning, Li Shixing, and Hu Jingjing flew backwards and hit the stone steps not far behind them. Crack, crack, crack. Dust rose, and there were cracking sounds. It was unknown whether it was the sound of bones cracking or the stone steps shattering. Shen Xian did not look back. He ignored the dust and took a deep breath. Then he loosened his fist. A blood-colored sword hilt first appeared in his palm. Then, accompanied by an even stronger life bond presence, a life bond sword intertwined with blood-colored and gray appeared in his hand. The black clouds in front of him started to dance and scatter like pieces of cloth. A mournful roar rang out. Then there was a loud dang sound, as if someone had rung a big bell. Ding Ning coughed continuously, as though he was going to cough out his lungs. There was blood in front of him. Not just the blood he coughed out, but his entire body seemed to be bleeding. Yet he still managed to support his body, sit up, and look towards the source of the sound. Where the black clouds had dissipated, two figures slid down the golden tower like flies that had been swatted away. The golden tower, which had been soft at the start, was now dazzling. The living spring in front of the golden pagoda had completely disappeared, leaving only a dried-up bottom of the spring, which was filled with white sand. Above the white sand, there was a huge crescent-shaped blade floating in the air. That was Jean Mok's life bond blade. Yet as Ding Ning looked, the crescent blade suddenly shook like a broken tile that had been carefully stacked together, was shaken and collapsed, turning into countless pieces that fell down. Ding Ning! A shrill howl sounded from the bottom of the golden tower. Chapter 483. You are much more seriously wounded than me. At the same time, an indifferent and confident voice rang out amidst the incomparably shrill cries. Shen Xian found it hard to believe that he had survived the killing trap. But he was alive. He also knew that the reason he was alive was not because of Jean Mok, but because of Ding Ning's attacks. While he was alive now, from the moment he entered the ancestral lands, he felt he had died many times. Coming back from the dead gave him unimaginable confidence. He did not hesitate. He attacked. The moment the gray and blood-colored life bond sword in his hand slashed out, it seemed to disappear into the air. However, at this moment, a layer of gray appeared on the mystic moon-curved blade that had shattered into countless pieces. It was as if gray moss had grown on damp tiles. However, on the gray moss, there was some red, as if there was a red core growing out of the gray moss. Shen Xian was seriously wounded at this time, but because he had great confidence, the sword essence of this attack was the most perfect attack he had made after he became the master of the great floating water prison. The gray moss was filled with an endless gloominess, but it also contained a kind of unrestrained cheerfulness that could spread its wings and soar high in the sky. These two completely different scents charged onto Jean Mok's body the moment his life bond item was destroyed, and before his connection to his body was completely severed. Jean Mok's right hand swiped with his fingers. Amidst the wails, a sharp blade essence flew up from his abdomen. The thin primal energies of the universe in his meridian points were madly squeezed out. Pew 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 pew. The broken pieces of the blade seemed to burn, giving off golden light and burning away the gray moss-like models. But at the same time, Jean Mok gave an even more wail. His eyes were filled with gray. It was as if a thick layer of moss had covered his eyes. His eyes were blind. In this space where one's perception was not always accurate, to lose sight again, a cultivator would lose all sense of the outside world. Also, Jean Mok's vital energy and primal energies of the universe had been squeezed to the limit. But at this time, Ding Ning, who had managed to sit up, shouted. He reached out with a faint sword essence and said, "Eclipse." This was Shen Xian's strongest sword move. If he used it now, it would affect his wounds and cause greater damage to his body. But sensing the direction of Ding Ning's faint sword essence, Shen Xian did not hesitate. With a low shout, his life bond sword that had disappeared appeared in the air. Following Ding Ning's sword essence, it flew straight into the air. Suddenly, dense and uneven mottled marks appeared on the intertwined red and gray sword, as if the passage of time had eroded the sword. There was a soft pop. A wave of energy visible to the naked eye spread from his sword. First, it was a white wave of energy and then it turned into a golden circle of light. Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing struggled to look up. They saw in shock that above the golden circle of light, there was something falling from the air that had seemed empty before. It was the edge of a well. It was the edge of the well under the giant tree that had disappeared. At this time, the edge of the well gave off golden light, like the legendary ritual weapon used by gods to suppress demons. It was filled with a vast and unstoppable presence. There was no sound. Shen Xian's life bond sword passed through the center of the well. The two did not seem to touch at all. However, wherever the tip of the sword passed through, the mottled marks on the body of the sword that seemed to have been eroded by time receded little by little, as if it had been washed by water. The entire sword was as clean as new, but it violently vibrated, shaking countless times in a single breath. When the edge of the well fell, the golden light quickly disappeared, turning gray like moss. Shen Xian's body fell, and he sprayed out a mouthful of blood. He could no longer stand and fell to the ground. His fall from the air had seemed slow, but in this moment he fell to the ground, right where the spring had disappeared. With a loud, muffled sound, all the fine white sand at the bottom of the living spring, along with the fragments of the mystic moon scimitar, flew up like a wave and swept outwards. This wave surged dozens of feet in front of them before it was exhausted and fell to the ground. Shen Xian started to cough violently. Each time he coughed, bloody foam would uncontrollably come out of his mouth. Yet he looked at Jean Moque at the bottom of the golden tower and laughed. Everyone could sense the meaning in Shen Xian's laughter. It was disdain, but more joy. In this space, other than Shen Xian's laughter, there was no other sound. Then it suddenly became quiet. Jean Moque did not look at Shen Xian. Leaning against the golden tower behind him and unable to stand, he looked at Ding Ning like he was looking at a monster. He suddenly said, "Who are you?" In the next moment, he started to laugh maniacally, and his laughter grew louder. Ding Ning did not respond. At this time, Jean Moque was at the end of his rope. He could not even attack again, but he smelled a thread of danger in this laughter. His brow unconsciously furrowed. The last flower remnant sword lying powerlessly in front of him flashed with thin, white flowers. It trembled and flew with difficulty toward Jean Moque like a dragonfly in the wind. Regardless of the meaning in Jean Moque's laughter, he wanted to kill Jean Moque immediately. Defeated the peerless wind and rain sword, separated Zheng Xiu's energy from the Sword Mountain sword, used the restrictions here to seal the mountain, killed Gu Huai, and then destroyed Wu Ji's escape route, and then used Wang Jingming's sword essence. Wang Jingming's air is so strong. Is he really stronger than all of Tianliang? Seeing the remnant sword flying towards him, Jean Moque's maniacal expression did not change. He laughed wildly and looked at Ding Ning. "But you think this can solve this situation, since I cannot get this elixir of life after all my schemes? Then let's die together." As he spoke, when the last flower remnant sword was a foot in front of him, his energy gave off an explosion. The last wave of destructive power that belonged to him rushed out from his back, breaking his spine. With flesh and broken bones, it rushed towards the golden pagoda behind him. There was a loud bang. A hole appeared in the golden tower he was leaning against. Chapter 484. No one had expected the golden pagoda to be so fragile. Because Jean Moque did not have much power left, no one sensed any dangerous presence. The golden pagoda was so easily broken. Even Ding Ning did not sense any strange presence when it was broken, just like when it was not broken. Ding Ning's brow furrowed deeply. He didn't feel any strange aura, which meant that he was in real danger. Shen Xian also did not sense any unusual presence. When the energy exploded, no cultivator could survive. Looking at Jean Moque's head hanging down, he knew this last person of Tianliang only had a moment left. At this time, he suddenly looked up. In the sky above, a patch of peach blossoms was falling. His eyes instantly widened to the extreme. The patch of peach blossoms covered his eyes. He reached out and grasped the pink peach blossoms falling towards him. How could there be peach blossoms here? Even though he sensed the existence of this patch of peach blossoms, and even sensed the subtle changes in the wind at the edges of the peach blossoms as they fell, he still believed this was an illusion. But when he grasped the peach blossoms, they were still real. The weight, temperature, and moisture of the peach blossoms reminded him that this was real. Shen Xian's pupils contracted. After one patch of peach blossoms, there were countless. He saw countless peach blossoms fluttering down, and the sky was dyed pink. The peach blossoms fell. Peach blossoms grew around him. He sensed to his shock that his cultivation was rapidly declining. What shocked him even more was that he felt a change in his body. Then he unconsciously reached out. He saw that he had two hands. His arm that had shattered in the battle in the great floating water prison had recovered, and his skin had become smooth and clean. What kind of restriction is this? He could not help but shout. But Ding Ning and the others were not around. His body started to stiffen. He remembered this peach forest. He saw that he was still wearing his present clothes, but his body had become the body of many years ago. He unconsciously reached into his bosom. He reached out and touched two letters. One was a transfer order from the warden's office, and the other was from the woman who had asked him to come here. When his fingers touched the two letters, his body began to tremble violently. If he had not accepted the transfer order of the warden's office back then and stayed for the sake of this woman, then what would he be like today? His body trembled violently, and his Adam's apple quickly stiffened. He could not make any sound. He saw a familiar, graceful figure appear at the other end of the peach forest. His eyes began to blur. He wanted to stay. However, all of the peach blossoms began to fly upwards. All the peach trees turned into peach blossoms and flew up. The woman's face became even clearer at this moment, and he could see every change in her expression. However, he saw his hands begin to shrink. The woman's figure disappeared before his eyes. His clothes became abnormally large, and his cultivation level was still decreasing. His body was constantly becoming younger, becoming smaller and smaller. He saw himself turning into a youth, a child before he started cultivating. Then his sorrow turned to endless terror, because time seemed to be flowing forward, and he was still becoming small. He could not stand and fell into his clothes. He became an infant, and even his consciousness started to disappear. He only heard his own cries, like the cries of a newborn. When the peach blossoms fell in front of Shen Xian, Jean Moque only had one breath left. Yet, after exhaling, he did not die. His eyes were not filled with pink, but purple. He saw the giant purple jade-like tree that had rotted and disappeared reappear in front of him. So wondrous. At this moment, he was pleasantly surprised. He didn't know where he got the strength to cheer. In the next moment, he saw the wounds on his body disappear, and he started to become younger. He stood in the Wuji Imperial Palace. He wore a bone crown. This was the bone crown of the most respected shaman of Wuji. He turned and walked back. Behind him was the shaman's temple. He passed through the dignified temple, smiled at the devout attendants, and entered the deepest secret room. In the secret room, there was a bloody body nailed to a wooden frame. My dear sister, what other restrictions are there in the Mountain of Ancestors? He was still smiling as he spoke gently to the mangled body that no longer resembled a man's or a woman's. The Mountain of Ancestors will punish you. The badly mangled body let out a mournful curse. Already punished, he said expressionlessly. Even my own sister wants to kill me. That is because you want to open the Mountain of Ancestors. You want to become an evil demon. Just because I want to open the Mountain of Ancestors, my sister wants to kill me. Sister, you are also an evil demon. He laughed scornfully and said in self-mockery, I am forced to treat my sister like this. I have become an evil demon long ago. As to the curse of the Mountain of Ancestors, did it not exist long ago? Jean Moque suddenly felt pain, not because of the impending death, but because he saw himself continue to shrink and the bone crown on his head disappear. He saw an even crueler scene of death by 1,000 cuts. A shepherdess about his age was executed. He knew this shepherdess. When he was patrolling around the ancestral lands, he knew this shepherdess. He had warned this shepherdess. This shepherdess was extremely respectful of the ancestral lands and could not enter the ancestral lands. He also learned that on the day the shepherdess entered the ancestral lands, there had been a great dust storm, and the shepherdess and her family's tent had been dozens of miles away. So the shepherdess could only have strayed due to the dust storm and entered the ancestral lands. He explained these reasons, but he could not change the rules of the mountain of ancestors. He could only watch as the shepherdess died. The ancestral lands are evil. He thought of the slaughter of Tianliang in the past and the mission of his ancestors, and said slowly inside. Then he saw himself become a child, an infant. Before his consciousness faded, he laughed. All the restrictions were almost destroyed, even if he, Ding Ning, and the others died here. Even if this golden pagoda had not shown its power. But more and more people would come, and they just had to face this last obstacle. Someone would get the elixir of life. Then this ancestral lands and mountain would no longer exist. When he became an infant and fell into his clothes, Ding Ning also became an infant. But unlike Xin Xian and him, Ding Ning did not feel the final terror. So it is the two-life flower. He did not know what he saw, but his expression became strange. Then he stood up from the infant, and his body started to grow. He coughed violently, blood seeping out of his mouth. The last flower remnant sword that had fallen to his side flew up again, turning into a straight sword light and flying forward. Chapter 485. When this sword light flew out, the world in front of him was cut open like paper. Everyone still maintained their previous posture. The last flower remnant sword flew past Jean Mok's body and into the golden pagoda. There was a 7-colored flower in the golden pagoda. The rainbow-colored flower grew on a white pebble. It did not have any roots, but it was extremely beautiful, as if it had just withstood the rain. The last flower remnant sword landed on this flower. Dozens of threads of vital energy in the sword started to burn and then attracted more primal energies of the universe. With a boom, Ding Ning's remnant sword started to burn with a ball of fire. The beautiful 7-colored flower quickly withered and burned to ashes in an instant. When the 7-colored flower burned to ash, the world in front of everyone disappeared. Xin Xian found that he was still standing just like before. Everything was the same except for his face was covered in tears. What happened? Hu Jingjing reached out in disbelief. Looking at her hand that had not shrunk, she could not help but shout. That's impossible. Jean Mok had not died. Time seemed to stop. Or rather, this was a matter of an instant. He had his last breath. Then he looked at Ding Ning and used his last breath to say these words. Then he died. He died with an indescribable emotion that even he could not understand. What is it? Li Shixing looked at the last flower remnant sword that was struggling to fly back and turned to ask Ding Ning. Two-life flower. Ding Ning coughed softly and said, in many legends, it is also called the nirvana flower, a strange flower that affects one's perception and consciousness. It can make people sleep forever until they die. But Hu Jingjing could not help but speak. You will see the events of your life. Ding Ning interrupted her and said, this is the wondrous aspect of this flower. These are the illusions it brings? I thought they were all real. Hu Jingjing was shocked as she thought about the feelings she had just now. She couldn't help but ask Li Shixing beside her, did you also feel like you were becoming smaller? Li Shixing glanced at her and said, I beat that guy up again and then threw him into the well. Which one? Hu Jingjing was stunned, but immediately understood that Li Shixing was talking about the person who had killed Li Shixing's dog when he was young. Thank you. At this time, to her and Li Shixing's surprise and suspicion, Xin Xian said seriously to Ding Ning. Both of them looked at Xin Xian in shock. What shocked them even more was that Xin Xian's face seemed very different from before. The layer of haze and indifference that had always shrouded his face had unknowingly faded away. Although his expression was still cold, it was as if a layer of dust had been washed away. Was it because he survived? Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing still could not understand the contents of Xin Xian's thanks. But Ding Ning nodded at Shun Xian and said seriously, "You're welcome." Then Ding Ning and Shun Xian stopped talking. Their gazes landed in the same place. It was not the broken golden pagoda, but the dried-up living spring. The bottom of the spring was filled with fine white sand. At this moment, the pure white sand was like real water, slowly seeping down and disappearing. The restriction power that affected the senses of cultivators seemed to have completely disappeared. As the fine white sand disappeared, even Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing could clearly sense that something with an indescribable and extremely powerful presence was appearing from the center of the fine sand. Looking at Ding Ning and Shun Xian's expressions, Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing knew what was about to happen. The legendary elixir of life was not in the golden pagoda, but under the spring. As if the truth was revealed, a sparkling and translucent light slowly emerged from the center of the white sand. After the light, there was more, and then it was all. A pure round silver crystal ball silently floated in the center of the white sand that was constantly receding downwards. Outside this silver crystal ball, many silver crystals of different sizes floated and floated. These silver crystals were like pieces of ice, constantly melting and shattering, and then constantly forming and changing. This is like a true world. Hu Jingjing looked dazedly at this silver crystal ball that was the size of a pill and could not help but say. Everyone felt the same. This was a wondrous feeling, just like how everyone was certain that this was the legendary elixir of life of Tianliang. I have interrogated countless criminals. While I cannot completely see through a person's heart, I can at least see that you are not greedy. Shun Xian turned to look at Ding Ning and asked, "Previously, you asked me what I thought of this elixir of life. I answered that you can deal with this elixir of life as you wish. But you are not greedy for this elixir of life. Is it because you feel that your 9-death silkworm is too strong and above this elixir of life? Or is it because you cannot agree with the elixir of life itself?" Ding Ning looked calmly at the pure round silver crystal ball. He thought of the 2-lifetime flower just now. After a moment of silence, he said, "If I cannot live this life well, what is the use of eternal life?" Shun Xian gave a rare smile. Because his smile rarely appeared, it was somewhat stiff and ugly. But it was very real. In reality, you should be the most suited to be the master of the great floating water prison. No one can see through people's hearts better than you, he said sincerely with a smile. Ding Ning did not respond to his words. He only looked at the pure round silver crystal ball in the middle of the white sand and began to move, walking towards it. As he walked, countless rustling sounds sounded in everyone's ears like silkworms moving through Ding Ning's body. Now, we all know his secret. Li Shixing listened to the sounds and said softly to Hu Jingjing after a moment of silence. Hu Jingjing was silent for a moment and said, "The Empress killed my master." After a pause, Hu Jingjing turned to look at Li Shixing and asked seriously, "What about you?" Li Shixing frowned slightly and seemed unhappy. He said, "He is my friend." Hu Jingjing suddenly smiled sweetly. Some people did not know right or wrong, and only cared about those close to them. She knew that for Li Shixing, all of Chongling could not compare to his true friend. Li Shixing did not pay attention to Ding Ning and the elixir of life. Regardless of what the elixir of life was for him, as long as Ding Ning had the confidence to walk towards it, he had thought of a way to deal with it. At the scene, there was one more person who knew the secret of Ding Ning's 9-death silkworm. Wu Lianzi leaned against the gold tower. The life force of the youth in the wasteland was, after all, exuberant. Despite being heavily injured, he had not died yet, and had not even fallen into a coma. He looked in shock, terror, and helplessness as Ding Ning walked towards the center of the white sand. Chapter 486. Ding Ning's movements were very careful. He walked to the center of the white sand with a serious expression. When he reached the center of the white sand, there was only a thin layer of white sand left, and the hard stone surface was exposed below. The hard stone surface was blue-black, like the stars in the wilderness at night. Just like the stars, there were many dots of light on the hard stone surface. They were small holes, but they were arranged in order, corresponding to the positions of the many stars in the sky. The legendary elixir of life floated at the same height as Ding Ning's chest. Outside the silver crystal ball, there were silver crystals that melted, shattered, and formed again. In Ding Ning's view, they were profound and had countless energy rules that he could not understand. He cautiously reached out with his finger. Facing him, Wu Lianzi saw a white thread silently pass through Ding Ning's fingertip and land among the changing silver crystals. It looked like a white thread, but there were countless fine particles moving and changing on the surface. Thinking of the legends of the Yu dynasty and that person in Chongling, the shock and helplessness in Wu Lianzi's eyes turned to absolute awe. Ding Ning's body started to tremble slightly, not because of his present emotions, but because of the 9-death silkworm in his body. These countless little silkworms that changed between tangible and intangible trembled in terror and were filled with the desire to consume. The white thread was the flow formed by the countless little silkworms. When the first little silkworm came into contact with the changing silver crystal, Ding Ning felt the same trembling and desire. This kind of trembling and desire came from the elixir of life. Ding Ning closed his eyes. He seemed to be looking at a battle. Countless white little silkworms were consuming the silver crystals, and countless silver crystals were consuming the silver little silkworms. Both sides were greedy and terrified. Terror came from not knowing who would consume who in the end, and who would win in the end. Complete consumption meant change. So what the peerless wind and rain sword said back then was the truth. If he accepted the power of the elixir of life, accepted the consumption of these crystals like the 9-death silkworm, it meant that his body would change. Ding Ning took a deep breath and opened his eyes. From a certain point of view, this elixir of life was also a kind of 9-death silkworm. The difference was that his 9-death silkworm could be controlled while this elixir of life could not. The swallowing sound became louder and louder. From the initial white thread to a trickle, it once again became a stream that was as thick as an arm. Even when he killed Gu Huai, everyone was certain that Ding Ning was the heir to the 9-death silkworm. But when they saw the legendary 9-death silkworm and the endless flow of silkworms towards the elixir of life, everyone was still shocked and puzzled. Even if it was ordinary blood, it would have run out long ago. Yet, these silkworms seemed endless. Ding Ning's body seemed to defy the laws of nature. How could it contain so many 9-death silkworms? Ding Ning's face became calmer and calmer. Even his solemn expression had completely disappeared. The white streams formed by the silkworms hit the silver crystal and gradually wrapped around the elixir of life, turning it into a ball with countless moving white silkworms. In the next moment, everything disappeared. The white silkworms disappeared. The elixir of life that was like a profound world disappeared. The fine white sand under his feet had all flowed away, leaving behind the hard blue-black rock covered in holes. Gulp, Hu Jingjing swallowed her saliva. The sound was very loud at this time. She could not help but feel embarrassed. But she saw that nothing had changed. When the 9-death silkworm retreated, and Ding Ning did not give off any special presents, she could not help but ask, "You refined this elixir of life. This is an existence higher than Realm 8. Ding Ning shook his head. Even if I do not know how this thing is formed, it is still an existence higher than Realm 8. Even the peerless wind and rain sword and the other Tianliang experts could not destroy it or even touch it. How could I refine it? But those clearly ate." Hu Jingjing instinctively wanted to say, but those silkworms had clearly eaten it. Otherwise, how could the elixir of life have disappeared? At this time, Ding Ning turned to look at her. With this glance, she stilled and inexplicably understood. "You stored it away?" Ding Ning nodded directly. "Will you use it?" Shen Xian looked at Ding Ning and added, "I mean when you truly face death." Ding Ning looked at him and shook his head. "Becoming another life that even you do not understand. This is not longevity, but death," Shen Xian said coldly. If you do not change, the agreement will not change. Li Shixing did not care at all about how Ding Ning would deal with the elixir of life. Long before Ding Ning walked towards the elixir of life, he knew that Ding Ning's attitude towards the elixir of life was like the peerless wind and rain sword of the past. His gaze landed on Wu Lianzi, who was on the broken gold tower nearby. He asked how to deal with him. For him, since Ding Ning was certain that Shen Xian could keep the secret of the 9-death silkworm, of all the people alive in this ancestral land, only Wu Lianzi was the greatest threat to Ding Ning. Wu Lianzi's body started to tremble violently. He felt that these people would not hesitate to kill him. Yet to his surprise, Ding Ning thought for a long time and asked him, I heard that you are the most favored of all the Wuji princes by the Empress Dowager. And in reality, most of the military power in Wuji is controlled by the Empress Dowager. Wu Lianzi used a lot of time to adjust his breathing and struggled to control his blood and flesh. His dislocated jaw returned to its original position. Then he struggled to look up at Ding Ning, who was calmly waiting for his reply. He said, I do not know what you mean. The war between Wuji and the Qin dynasty has been a chess game set up by Zhang Moke and Zheng Xiu from the start. Even the Wuji royal family that dominates the plains, their powerful cultivators and fearless warriors are just chess pieces controlled by Zheng Xiu. Ding Ning looked calmly at Wu Lianzi and said, I mean, if we can make this war end peacefully as soon as possible, then let this war end peacefully. Wu Lianzi was stunned and instinctively said, how to end peacefully? Even if Wuji wants peace, will the Qin dynasty allow it? If you want peace, we do not need to think. The Empress Dowager, who loves you, will think of a way. Ding Ning looked at him and said with slight disdain, as to Zheng Xiu, when she gets what she wants, or what she wants to get disappears, there is no need to continue this war. After a pause, his disdain grew. Does she really want to take over a piece of the plains that is of no use to her? Shen Xian glanced at Ding Ning and said, she should not know what is truly in this ancestral land. Ding Ning nodded. But the ancestral land is gone. Everything no longer exists. What she wants the most is the heaven-replenishing divine art. Shen Xian understood Ding Ning's meaning and did not speak further. Wu Lianzi could not completely understand Ding Ning's meaning, but he invisibly agreed with Ding Ning's suggestion. He calmed down and thought seriously. He said, just me alone is not enough. With just my life and some of my words, the Empress Dowager cannot convince the people. For a ruler, there is no need to talk about reason, only the interests of the country. Ding Ning smiled faintly and turned to look back. He said, if I annotate all of those engraved sword manuals and give them to Wuji, do you think she can convince the people? Chapter 487. Wu Lianzi was shocked speechless. Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing were also shocked to the extreme. Seal scripts, diagrams, and even the characters of sword manuals themselves were the hardest to comprehend. Yet if someone could annotate and explain the true meaning, then even some profound sword manuals would not be hard to understand for cultivators with some comprehension ability. At this time, in the many cultivation places of Chongling, there were many sword manuals that were hard to understand. The main reason was that these sword manuals were the secret treasures of the sections. Many of them were passed down from one generation to the next. If something happened to the master or the disciple, then even if the sword manual was passed down, the people of the sect may not be able to comprehend it. For example, Hu Jingjing's Treasure Light Temple. The true meaning of the most important sword manual of Treasure Light Temple was passed down to Hu Jingjing. If Hu Jingjing died in the plains, even if the disciples of Treasure Light Temple saw the sword manual, they may not be able to comprehend it. In reality, from ancient times to now, many ultimate techniques were lost because they were kept secret and did not want to be passed down. Tianliang had been an astounding dynasty in the past. Just by looking at the remaining power of the peerless wind and rain sword, one could see how valuable the sword manuals left behind by the Tianliang experts were. This is important enough. Wu Lianzi could not control the trembling in his voice. He wanted to ask Ding Ning why he did this, but when he thought of the other's identity as the 9-death silkworm, He immediately knew his question was unnecessary. He hesitated for a moment, took a deep breath, and tried to make himself calmer. At the same time, his voice was more respectful and polite. "Then what does Mr. want me to help you with? Keep a secret from me." Ding Ning looked at him and said slowly and seriously, "Do not let anyone know that the 9-death silkworm is on me unless I reveal it to the world myself." Wu Lianzi nodded. Even though he was seriously wounded, and every drop of blood was worth treasuring, he still used a small knife to cut his palm and swear to the heavens. After completing the Wuji's most solemn blood oath, Wu Lianzi continued to look at Ding Ning. In his view, just helping Ding Ning keep a secret was not enough for his life and the enormous treasures of the ancestral mountain. Ding Ning looked calmly at him. He naturally understood the meaning in this youth's pure gaze. But he did not say what he wanted and asked Wu Lianzi, as the Wuji prince, "What do you want the most?" The story of that person in Chongling, even in the distant Wuji and even further Donghu, was a true legend. Especially after seeing people like Gu Huai and Zhan Mok die in front of Ding Ning, he felt true respect and awe towards Ding Ning. Therefore, he did not think about anything else. After being stunned for a moment, he began to seriously consider Ding Ning's question. "I want Wuji to survive well. The people of Wuji can live without worry on the grasslands. We do not need to worry about being swallowed up by the Qin dynasty or other dynasties, or being forced to submit and be enslaved." He thought for a moment and said, "If I can win in the battle with Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiao, I can guarantee this," Ding Ning said. No one felt that Ding Ning's words were laughable. From a certain point of view, Ding Ning did not just represent the 9-death silkworm, but all of the Bazinkindo ground. Especially from a certain point of view, the lands of the Qin dynasty were the Bazinkindo ground. Wu Lianzi started to understand Ding Ning's meaning. He struggled to lift his head and looked at Ding Ning's calm eyes. He said softly, "So Sir hopes that my Wuji will give you enough support in your battle with Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiao." Ding Ning met his gaze and said sincerely, "I do not just hope to be friends with you, but with all of Wuji. But right now, your will is not the will of all of Wuji. You must ensure that in the future, Wuji will listen to your opinion, and not the opinion of people like Zhan Mok." Wu Lianzi understood the meaning of Ding Ning's words. He thought for a moment and said, "You mean for me to first grasp all of Wuji? The sword manuals in the ancestral lands are not just my gifts to the Wuji Empress Dowager and Wuji, but also to you." Ding Ning looked at Wu Lianzi, who had turned serious, and said slowly, "I hope that you will have some of the most important sword manuals." Wu Lianzi had seen many shocking things today, but when he heard Ding Ning's words, he was still shocked. The peerless wind and rain sword is a very powerful and meticulous person. He is also a great person. Ding Ning did not look at him. Instead, he looked up and said slowly, "The reason I was able to solve the peerless wind and rain sword was because the sword manual of the peerless wind and rain sword was on the stone beasts and steels outside." Hu Jingjing could not help but say, "Then why?" "True meaning," Ding Ning said simply. Then he looked at her and added, "Only those who can comprehend the true meaning of the sword can truly comprehend his sword manuals. Those who can comprehend his sword manuals will naturally be close to his state of mind, or rather, understand his person from his vast sword essence." Hu Jingjing immediately reacted. So he does not fear people comprehending his sword manuals, because those who can comprehend his sword manuals can understand his intentions. Those who agree with him will not be like Zhan Mok and want to accept this elixir of life. Ding Ning nodded and looked at Xin Xian and Wu Lianzi. He said, "What many people in the world want the most is recognition and life and death together." But Hu Jingjing glanced at Wu Lianzi and looked like she wanted to speak but stopped. Li Shixing glanced at her and said, "Just say what you want to say. My master told me that people change. At different stages, people will have different views. Some people will even become complete strangers." Hu Jingjing hesitated for a moment and said, "Even if it's a blood oath, I still don't feel at ease. Because only we are paying, and he does not have anything of equal value on our side." Wu Lianzi had lost a lot of blood, but when he heard Hu Jingjing's words, his face still turned blood red. He wanted to argue, but at this time, Li Shixing shook his head and said coldly, "No need, I believe him." Hu Jingjing stilled. Wu Lianzi stilled. Li Shixing smiled coldly. He is the Empress Dowager's most beloved fifth imperial prince. It is very likely that he will be made the crown prince. For someone as important as him, he risked his life to hunt me down just for a steed. Of all the Wuji princes, other than an idiot like him, who would do this? Hu Jingjing was stunned for a moment. She inexplicably thought of why Li Shixing had been banished here. She inexplicably reacted. Li Shixing's trust was based on the fact that Wu Lianzi was the same type of person as him. Being called an idiot, Wu Lianzi did not feel any anger. He felt inexplicably moved. His hatred towards Li Shixing completely disappeared and was filled with an indescribable feeling. He instantly had a deeper understanding of the word recognition that Ding Ning had mentioned. Your Chongling has a saying, "Scholars die for those who understand them." He looked up at Ding Ning and Li Shixing and said slowly and seriously, "I can die for you." Then he leaned forward, prostrated on the ground, and bowed to Ding Ning. He said, "Master," for him, regardless of whether Ding Ning recognized him as a disciple. Since Ding Ning had taught him the Tianliang sword manual and the peerless wind and rain sword, he was his teacher in his mind. Chapter 488. Speaking of the cold days of the past, the sky was really cold. Chongling's autumn this year seemed to be thicker than in previous years, and the wind was colder. The palace attendants in the imperial palace had changed into their thin cotton robes. They walked in the palace with lanterns in the morning, but their hands were still cold. Empress Zhengxiu sat behind the table in the study deep in the imperial palace, facing the spirit spring shrouded in white spirit energy. She was 100 paces away from this spirit spring, so her study appeared unusually empty, or rather lonely. Ever since she put on the imperial crown and sat on the throne of the Qin dynasty's empress, she had always been so lonely. Today, nothing seemed to have changed. Yet, as she sat here quietly, her thoughts and perception flew into the clouds. Through the starlight that people could not detect in the day, she reached the endless void that her eyes could not reach. The starlight turned into pale white sparks in her perception, falling in the void. From formless to tangible, and then to nothing, constantly changing. Some of the starlight had originally landed on the largest sword in the world. But before this, a patch of black clouds had appeared in her perception, blocking the starlight that had landed on the sword. When the black clouds dissipated, she could no longer sense the existence of the sword. Many years ago, she believed that Gu Huai stood firmly on her and Yuan Wu's side because Gu Huai had let go of the life bond energy of this sword and accepted her starlight. This sword had merged with her will. As long as Gu Huai's life bond energy was present, she could always sense the existence of this sword and what this sword had encountered. But now, she could no longer sense this sword. This meant that Gu Huai's life bond energy had completely dissipated and Gu Huai was dead. Who in the world could kill Gu Huai? That Tianliang person called Zhan Mok? None of this seemed to be important to her current state of mind. Most importantly, there was one less person by her side. Even if the people standing next to her were just following her and Yuan Wu's will, or had their own goals, when a person's path grew longer, and the people they knew disappeared one by one, this feeling was true loneliness. A young person dressed in light yellow robes appeared on the path outside her study and stood respectfully with his head bowed. There were many young people in the imperial palace, but other than Huang Jinwei, no one else could have such a respectful and humble attitude in front of her. The empress gathered her thoughts and stood up. She walked through the spirit spring that was shrouded in white mist and stopped not far away from him. Hearing her footsteps, Huang Jinwei, standing with his head bowed, felt nervous and restrained for the first time. It was not because of terror, but because he was not sure what kind of emotion he would face. He did not appear unnatural, but his heart was unprecedentedly unnatural. Regarding your teacher, Are you dissatisfied with my decision? Without any superfluous words, the Empress looked at him and asked calmly. Huang Jinwei was silent for a moment and said, "It's dissatisfaction." The Empress was not surprised by this bureau chief's attitude and answer, and even showed some satisfaction in her eyes. Then she raised her head slightly and said, "Do not forget I allowed him to become your teacher." Huang Jinwei took a deep breath, but did not know how to exhale or how to answer. "In reality, your teacher may not be satisfied with many things I have done," the Empress said slowly. The Empress said slowly and calmly, "But I had you follow him until the end because I want you to understand, no matter what choice he and I make, it is for the Qin dynasty to move forward more steadily." Huang Jinwei was silent for a moment and then said, "I understand." The Empress also looked at him. After a moment of silence, she said, "You should understand the expectations your teacher and I have for you." Huang Jinwei knew the meaning of her words and said again, "I will naturally make the same choice as my teacher. The Qin dynasty is most important." The Empress' satisfaction grew. She said softly, "Your teacher must have passed the city guarding sword to you." Huang Jinwei shook his head and said, "Teacher did not pass the city guarding sword to me." The Empress stilled slightly and frowned. "No." Huang Jinwei said, "No. Does he not want you to stay on those turrets?" The Empress was silent for a moment and then suddenly laughed. "Maybe he thinks the same as me. This Chongling needs walls in the end." Huang Jinwei's body shook slightly. She continued, "Since that is the case, you will supervise the construction of the walls. Work will start this winter." Huang Jinwei had already understood her meaning from her first sentence, but at this moment he still felt a little incredulous and raised his head. The Empress saw the expression in his eyes, but her expression was still so indifferent she did not seem like a woman of the mortal world. She said coolly, "Everything changes first, rules and habits need to be changed. When habits are changed, people will understand that there is nothing that cannot be changed. They will understand to accept the will of this dynasty." Huang Jinwei hesitated for a moment and said, "Many people will feel imprisoned. Then they need to understand restraint." The Empress smiled. Her smile was perfect and did not contain any other emotions. "The greatest use of the walls is not to fend off enemies, but to divide the boundaries. Those who know how to restrain and accept the will of this dynasty will enter. Those who do not will be excluded and receive unequal treatment." Huang Jinwei bowed his head. He was a true gentleman in the eyes of everyone. Not expressing a different opinion represented obedience and execution. The Empress was even more satisfied and said, "You will witness the glory of this dynasty. But that may not be what I want. You let me see my teacher's choice because you thought my teacher would teach me what choice to make. But you do not know that before my teacher died, he let me choose myself." What she did not know was that the young bureau chief was thinking the same thing. "What do you plan to do with this sword?" Shenxian looked at Ding Ning and asked. The mist around the mountain of ancestors was slowly dissipating. While the scent of blood was still strong, the blue sky had been cleansed by the peerless wind and rain sword essence. Fresh sunlight started to shine into the valley of the mountain of ancestors. Wu Lianzi knelt on the ground and called Ding Ning his teacher. Ding Ning's gaze landed on the enormous sword mountain sword embedded in the wall. The sword mountain sword was the largest and heaviest sword in the world. At the same time, the sword itself was one of the strongest and most powerful swords in the Bazin Kendo ground. Looking at Ding Ning's gaze, he knew that Ding Ning did not want to leave this sword here. "Take this sword with you." Ding Ning turned to look at him and said, "I will tell you how to use this sword and give you the heaven-replenishing divine art to take back to Chongling." Shenxian's eyebrows rose slightly, and he did not thank him. Before he could speak, Ding Ning's gaze landed behind Li Shixing. "This thing is not suited for you." He looked at the thing Li Shixing was carrying and said. Li Shixing turned around. He had been carrying that strange crystal pillar all this time. The insects living in this pillar had killed almost all the cultivators who had wanted to enter the mountain of ancestors. Hearing Ding Ning's words, he was not disappointed and said curiously, "This thing is really useful?" "This is sky nether crystal." Ding Ning said, "Like sky iron, it is something that fell from the sky. It is one of the hardest to break crystals in the world. Even more importantly, it can make light refract inside for a long time before it is released. Make light refract inside for a long time before it is released? Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing realized at the same time and stilled. Sunlight and most starlight mean warmth and life. Ding Ning continued. To be able to store light, it can provide warmth and life for some things. After a pause, Ding Ning looked at Li Shixing and Hu Jingjing and said, in the past, in the Yu dynasty, this kind of crystal also fell from the sky. But back then, it was forged into an artifact and not something that can maintain the life of the insects and restrain their bodies. Li Shixing finally confirmed who this thing belonged to. He simply took off the crystal on his back and handed it to Hu Jingjing. Yours. Hu Jingjing was slightly flattered. But looking at the crystal that did not fit her size, she felt slightly wronged and said softly, "Can't you help me carry it first?" Li Shixing frowned but did not say anything in the end. He put the crystal he had just taken off on his back. Ding Ning looked at the two of them and could not help but smile. Then he turned to look at Xin Xian and said softly, "Gu Huai is dead. She will be even lonelier. You will become more important when you return to Chongling." Xin Xian finally asked the question he wanted to ask just now. "What about you? Pretend that I am dead." Ding Ning looked at him, Li Shixing and the others, including Wu Lianzi, who was struggling to get up. "So, I need all of you to help me act out this play, so that people are sure I am dead." Chapter 489. The weather was really cold. On the mountain of Celestial Seal Sect, yellow leaves started to fall with the autumn wind. The ground was sprinkled with gold, but it did not feel warm, just bleak. The bleakness came from Qingyuan, from Gao. If one was too high, one would be left alone. The most secluded grass hut in Celestial Seal Sect was not at the highest point, but there were windows on all sides. Those who walked here could see the study areas of Celestial Seal Sect, and where all the disciples lived and studied. "Junior brother, why did you allow him to enter the Celestial Ascending Hall to cultivate?" In the thatched hut, a voice even colder than Xiao Yi's echoed. The person who spoke was an old man in a black Taoist robe. His hair was covered in frost, and his eyes were filled with the vicissitudes of life. His skin was white with a tinge of red, tender and smooth like a virgin. Opposite him sat another person who was younger than him, but looked more like an old man. This was the master of Celestial Seal Sect. Celestial Ascending Hall is also in Celestial Seal Sect. Since this person was allowed to enter Celestial Seal Sect, then why not allow him to cultivate in Celestial Ascending Hall? The voice of the master of Celestial Seal Sect sounded, but it was warm and calm like a ray of sun in autumn. Things change with the passage of time. The black-robed old man shook his head indifferently. Times are different. The yellow heaven Dao seal has returned to Celestial Seal Sect, and you arranged for it to be with Zhang Yi. If Zhang Yi comprehends the Celestial Ascending Dao seal in the Celestial Ascending Hall, the yellow heaven and Celestial Ascending Dao seals will both be in the hands of one person. This is rare in the history of Celestial Seal Sect, much less a Qin person. Senior Sect brother, your words are reasonable. The master of Celestial Seal Sect looked at the black-robed old man and said. The yellow-robed old man mocked. Is it only reasonable? It just makes some sense. The master of Celestial Seal Sect looked calmly at the yellow-robed old man and said, even more importantly, I did not just allow him to enter Celestial Ascending Hall to cultivate today. He has been cultivating in Celestial Ascending Hall for many days. Why did Senior Sect brother only express such seriousness today? There is more. After a pause, the master of Celestial Seal Sect asked seriously, where are Junior Sect brother Zhu and Junior Sect brother Chu? Why didn't the two of them come with Senior brother? The black-robed old man was silent for a moment and said, Junior Sect brother, you have always been the smartest person in Celestial Seal Sect, so you should understand the situation now. The master of Celestial Seal Sect was silent for a moment. He looked solemnly at him and asked, is it really important if she is Qin? Is Zheng Xiu not Qin? You should know that she is the reason why Celestial Seal Sect has its current status. The black-robed old man's face was suddenly filled with anger, and he said sternly, "Since the beginning, you've been willful in taking in this child. Previously, I thought that I would let you have your way. In any case, this child is just mediocre. However, this child first understood the meaning of the Ascending Heaven Talisman, and also has the Yellow Heaven Taoist Talisman as his companion. Even more importantly, he used a sword to enter Seal Essence. Even if he cultivates the Seal Essence of Celestial Seal Sect, Junior Sect Brother, can you tell if he is a Sword of Min Mountain Sword Sect or a Seal of Celestial Seal Sect?" The Master of Celestial Seal Sect listened to the black-robed old man's words with emotion in his eyes. He shook his head and said, "The mountains are red, and the leaves are falling. This is a good scene, but in the end, the lush leaves come from the trees themselves. Senior Sect Brother, you only see the glory of Celestial Seal Sect and do not understand the true inheritance of Celestial Seal Sect. The seal path of Celestial Seal Sect has flourished, and is not just this superficial glory. Why do we need to care about this superficial glory? All true inheritances are in the person." The Master of Celestial Seal Sect looked past the black-robed old man at the yellow leaves dancing in a forest below the mountain. He said slowly, "As long as Yu Yi and Zhang Yi are here, the seal essence of Celestial Seal Sect will only be stronger in their hands. Even if Celestial Seal Sect is not as glorious now, there will be a more glorious Celestial Seal Sect in the future." The black-robed old man looked calmly at him and sneered. "Junior Sect Brother's words are reasonable. However, your concept is too high, and people cannot agree with you. In the end, Celestial Seal Sect is not Junior Sect Brother's sect alone. Even if Junior Sect Brother is the master of Celestial Seal Sect and has the right to decide many things, do not forget that we helped you to the position of Sect Master. You will must be acknowledged by most of us. Right now, Senior Sect Brother is the only one in front of me. Junior Sect Brother Zhu and Junior Sect Brother Chu are not here." The Master of Celestial Seal Sect said coolly, "Putting aside who is acknowledged by most people, what is most important is that you have come to me against Zhang Yi. What do you want me to promise you?" The black-robed old man put away all of his anger and disdain. He bowed deeply to him and said solemnly, "Have him die." The Master of Celestial Seal Sect frowned deeply, but was not angry. He asked, "Zheng Xiao did not have such intentions before. Why must he die now? Because she feels he is growing? With Zheng Xiao's personality, she will not break off relations with me because of this." The black-robed old man seemed to know he would have such a question. He did not look up and said respectfully, "Because her Junior Sect Brother is dead, so she does not need to consider her Junior Sect Brother's feelings. A hidden danger like Zhang, he has no need to live." The Master of Celestial Seal Sect stilled and was in disbelief. "That wine shop youth is dead?" The black-robed old man looked up at him and said, "Any genius will die." The Master of Celestial Seal Sect thought and said, "If I do not agree to you killing Zhang Yi, then do you want to kill me? Can you kill me? I cannot kill you." The black-robed old man looked indifferently at the Master of Celestial Seal Sect and said, "But I can trap Junior Sect Brother for at least half a day. In order to kill a Qin person you say is unrelated, you even used a sect's holy legacy like the half-day Divine Seal. Is this the glory of Celestial Seal Sect you seek?" The Master of Celestial Seal Sect sighed, stood, and walked to the window. In this process, the black-robed old man did not stop him. Both the black-robed old man and the Master of Celestial Seal Sect knew they could not break through the seal essence of the half-day Divine Seal. Since it could not be changed, then there was no meaning in doing anything, especially if one or two more people died for this. The Master of Celestial Seal Sect looked at the Taoist temple that flickered in and out of the golden forest. His brow was filled with great sorrow. He said softly, "Who want to kill him? Junior Sect Brother Zhou, or your disciple?" "It is Chen Xingchui." The black-robed old man glanced at him and seemed to see his thoughts. Disdain appeared at the corners of his mouth. The master of Celestial Seal sect did not show any great shock on his face, but his body shook slightly. Chen Xingxue was a disciple of Celestial Seal sect, but he was a disciple of Celestial Seal sect from many years ago. His current identity was already a general at the border of the Yan dynasty. The generals of the border had experienced true life and death formations. Ordinary cultivators could not compare to him, and naturally, he was much stronger than the cultivators of the same cultivation who lived peacefully in Celestial Seal sect. But the most important of all, even more importantly, using the half-day divine seal to trap him and kill a disciple of Celestial Seal sect was just to make sure nothing went wrong, but a general of the court had been sent. The general of the border had returned to Celestial Seal sect to kill. This told him that the changes today were not just in Celestial Seal sect. Inexplicably, the light in this wise old man's eyes dimmed. He felt slightly cold. This day was really cold. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.